Our story begins in the interrogation room of the Jiangxi Public Security Bureau, where we see someone sitting at the table. His hands are on his head, and he is in complete despair. Then, the first officer, Exu Jin, enters, calling his name, Zhang Yi. Upon seeing the woman enter, his eyes widen. He covers his face and screams for her to quickly close the door. It was as if the open door caused him some kind of pain. Closing the door, she tells him that she already did, and that he doesn't need to get so agitated about it. Calming down, he sits back on the chair, groaning. She asks if he can tell her what happened, but he says that he already told her and she wouldn't believe him. Shouting, the woman tells him not to try tricks to evade criminal responsibility. She takes out a phone, shows him the screen, and continues yelling at him to think about what he had done to his own family. He sees the disturbing image on the phone, his wife and daughter lying on the floor dead, and in the next instant, something catches his attention. Trembling with fear, he points behind the woman and says there is something behind her. She flinches. She turns to look, but even with the door emitting a red light, she shouts that there is nothing there. Sounds are heard, and this time she turns her attention back to the door. He hides under the table, and again, the woman tells him to stop playing tricks. But then, we see several eyes peering through the cracks in the floor. The entire room begins to be overtaken by these eyes, but it seems that only Zhang Yi can see them, scattered across all the walls of the room. The man trembles and sweats in fear until he hears the woman calling his name again. And when he looks up from under the table, her face is completely monstrous. She had also transformed into something grotesque and terrifying. Zhang Yi is overwhelmed by this sight. With a scream, he pushes the table upward, shouting for her not to come near him. But in the next instant, an entire hand is shoved into his mouth. He starts drooling, and we see that the hand inside his mouth is his own. He hears the woman screaming, asking what he is doing. It was a genjutsu. The woman yells for someone to come help immediately, and then the nightmare finally ends. The day passes in the city, and inside a building, we see some models posing for photos. Meanwhile, at Jiang City University, inside the Paranormal Activity Club, some students are discussing the case we just witnessed. A bespectacled boy says that the man ended his own life by tearing out his tongue and shudders in horror as he speaks about it. His name is Xibinben. Another student, also a bespectacled nerd, looks fearful in front of the chubby one, but then the latter assumes a more relaxed posture and says that the story is real. He continues, saying that the story he had heard was about multiple people dying after seeing an image online. It was the cause of everything. The other student, even more afraid, asks what image, and the chubby one says he will look it up for him. Realizing the danger, the skinny one snatches the phone from his hands, saying that if it were true, he shouldn't be looking at it either. But then, a third student asks, "Are you guys talking about this?" The two boys turn to look at him, and then, a picture of a giant red eye appears on the computer screen, making the two boys scream in terror. The one who showed the picture was Yuan Zhenshi, and he reassures them, saying they don't need to worry, it's nothing. The two, still trembling and clinging to each other in fear, ask why he is so sure about that. He explains that it's not exactly what they think, but refusing to elaborate further, he says he has to leave now because he has something fun to do. The others protest, saying it's still early, asking why he was acting like an old man. He should enjoy life more. He wasn't even studying, so he didn't need to sleep early. But Yuan refuses and leaves. Now we see the building where Zhenshi lies. He inserts the key, unlocks the door, and enters his home, finally introducing himself. His name is Yuan Zhenshi. He was just an ordinary high school student, living a mundane life in his past life, until one day he was drawn by some strange murmurs in the old library of his university. A book titled Chronicles of Urban Legends called out to him, urging him to come closer, and he reached out his hand to grab it. As soon as he touched the book and opened it to read, a sinister energy began to pour out from its pages, hovering over him, until something resembling a pendant is formed right in front of him, causing him to be transported to this new world and becoming a student at Jiangxi University. The original's parents had died in a plane crash, leaving him a large inheritance, which allowed him to live comfortably without many problems. However, his life was completely affected by that notebook he held in his hands. He had entered a 30-day countdown to the end of his life. Grabbing the pendant with his hands, he is able to summon the book before him, and upon opening it again, we see what the book's rules are. The legends he writes in this notebook will become real. Their scope will grant him benefits, and those who die as a result will also provide him with bonuses. According to the notebook, his lifespan would be extended as he accumulated points of kindness and malice. After understanding the first rule, he shouted out his urban legend about a mother and daughter who suffered from domestic violence. In the city of Jiang, anyone who sees the photo from 1973 and is a perpetrator of domestic violence will soon see an eyeball in every gap they encounter. The eyeballs will stare at each other from all possible gaps, breaking the criminal's spirits and making them prefer to erase themselves from existence rather than endure such madness. The notebook also has a magical property. Anyone who sees the photo and attracts the attention of the eyeballs will have their life experiences related to the urban legend recorded in the pages of that notebook. He earned 2 points of kindness and malice and 370 legend points. This score depended on the impact the urban legend had among people. Closing the notebook, he begins to think about the efficiency of the last urban legend he created. It was weak and only increased his lifespan to 92 days. And if he doesn't do something about it, he might end up being killed by the notebook itself when his time reaches 0. Back in Class K at Jiangxi School, the MC is sleeping on his desk, and some girls try to wake him up since class had already ended, and they were inviting him to go to the club. Waking up, he stretches. He was very tired from staying up late looking for inspiration for a new urban legend, which left his neck stiff and sore. He gets up and starts walking out of the classroom. It was frustrating not being able to find inspiration for a new story. Even in the Paranormal Activities Club, they did nothing but play games and watch anime. So as he leaves school, he decides that he will send them a message letting them know he won't be going to the club today. He sends the message, and his classmates get annoyed with him. The chubby one even asks if he's trying to impress others by secretly training in games alone. The protagonist laughs, while the other boys thought this was all nonsense. For him, it was a matter of life and death. Something catches his attention, making him look to the side. In an alley between buildings, he sees a group of delinquents beating up a boy. Crying, the boy apologizes, saying he was wrong and begging them to stop hitting him. At that moment, the MC calls out to them, saying that 5 against 1 was very unfair and asking if they weren't ashamed of themselves. The boy who was attacking turns around and then yells at the protagonist, asking who the hell he was and if he wanted to die. Someone in the group recognizes him, which piques Zenshi's interest. He adopts an intimidating posture, causing the boy who recognized him to warn the leader not to mess with the protagonist, saying that he was crazy. But Rangji doesn't care about that. He points out that there were many of them against one, but the boy reminds him that they had done the same thing before, and 3 of them had ended up in the hospital at the hands of the MC. This makes the boy nervous, and he ends up giving up on the idea of attacking Zenshi. Dropping the bat he was holding, Rangji says he's hungry and calls his gang to go get something to eat, leaving the nerd behind. The crying boy starts thanking the protagonist. His name was Qin Xiaoshan. He thanks him once more, and the protagonist thinks that the one who should be grateful is himself for the inspiration for a new urban legend. Back at his house, Zenshi is on his computer, researching school violence rates using the Beidou website, and I found out that this site actually exists. Reading an extensive study, he realizes that this particular problem was widespread everywhere, which makes him think about what he should write in the notebook. Grasping the pendant to summon it, he begins to recall the terror on the nerd's face as he was being beaten by his classmates. He was weak, which made him a target. Those who enjoy provoking others always target those who cannot defend themselves and have no one to help them. Only by giving them weapons will it be possible to eradicate this violence buried beneath an apparently calm reality. And so, inspired by everything he had witnessed earlier, the protagonist spends 30,000 legend points to create this new story, which states that, at exactly midnight, on a website called Infernal Communication, you can enter the name of a person you hold a grudge against, and then you will see a girl emerging from the depths. Her name is Red Spider Lily. Now we see a recording of someone being beaten, with their attacker shouting that they still dared to come to school despite being warned not to. A blonde girl was hitting another girl, her classmate, calling her ugly and saying that she was polluting everyone's sight by leaving her house and that she should just die. The others also mocked the beaten girl, making fun of her attempt to use makeup to appear less ugly in the eyes of others. The girl cried, covered in bruises and injuries, and someone asked to take a picture of her while she cried, saying she looked like a ghost. The blonde girl's name was Ishiguro Kui, and she continued mocking her, making cruel remarks about the birthmark on the other girl's face. In the video, we see the beaten girl taking a lily out of her bag. Noticing her anger, the blonde girl taunted her, asking if she still intended to resist. But in the next instant, as the blonde grabbed the other girl by the hair, we see the hatred in the victim's eyes as she clutches the lily, saying that she was forced to do this. Ishiguro then starts slamming the girl's head against a wall, commanding her to die. Laughing in the middle of her assault, she mocks the idea that a mere flower could kill her, calling the girl an idiot. The flower is torn to pieces, and in the very next moment, the beating comes to an abrupt end. The green-haired girl looks at her aggressor while the one recording seems confused about this sudden shift. When the camera turns back to Ishiguro, we see that she looks cadaverous, as if all the blood had been drained from her body in an instant. Her head twists 180 degrees backward, like something out of The Exorcist, as she begs for help, while the others scream and flee in terror. Panic spreads, making her classmates run away without looking back, while the camera continues capturing everything. Convulsing, Ishiguro begins to panic as well, until her body collapses to the ground, still in that deathly state. The beaten girl stares at the scene, crying. And then we return to reality. Someone asks her if she is the girl from the video, and sitting in a chair, shaking and crying, she confirms that she is. They were in the director's office at Jiangxi University. Someone states that the number of unnatural deaths in the city has already surpassed 200. The one making this statement while looking at her phone is assistant Chi Xiaoyan. She continues, explaining that all these deaths followed the same pattern, brain death. And the only suspect in this particular case was the girl who had been assaulted in the video. The special department had taken her into custody. With a piercing gaze, a woman seated nearby asks whether the girl had any contact with Red Spider Lily and demands details about that moment. That woman was Kinchi, the head of the special department, and the only person who could save the girl from this situation. Cooperating was her best option. Trying to calm herself, the girl says she will tell the story. A few days ago, around midnight, a post appeared on Forum R, a post that could neither be deleted nor edited. It was pinned immediately and talked about this legend. The post claimed that infernal communication could only be accessed at midnight. Through it, you could submit the name of a person you held a grudge against, and the girl Yomi would send them to hell. At first, everyone thought it was just some kind of promotional stunt for a new game or an anime, so she waited until midnight to try accessing the site, and it appeared. With a headline that read, "I will eliminate your resentment for you." The site contained only a text box where you could enter a name and submit it. She typed in the name Ishiguro Kui and sent it. Still skeptical about whether any of it was real, she told herself she shouldn't believe in such things. After all, if it were true, people could get hurt. But then she remembered all the times she had been beaten and humiliated, and not even the teachers seemed to genuinely care about her situation. His mother also didn't want to transfer her to another school because she had worked hard to get her enrolled in Jiangxi University, and she had hit her because of that. In the classroom, she was humiliated by Ishiguro, even having things poured over her head. All these feelings filled her with hatred. She had had enough of it all and wanted Yomi girl to bring the harm she desired, no matter how. A blood-stained envelope appeared on the computer screen with the message sent. She waited for a few seconds, still, then started thinking she must be crazy for putting her hopes in a website based on an urban legend. Crying, her tears fell, to the point of making her feel dizzy and begin to pass out. The girl heard a voice asking if she was looking for her, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a girl with purple hair, dressed in a school uniform, standing in the middle of a field full of red lilies. The girl asked if she was Yomi from the underworld, to which the answer was yes, she was her. Her eyes were red, and she held one of the lilies in her hand. Yomi told her she didn't need to be afraid. She was there to end her nightmare. Walking toward the desperate and frightened girl, Yomi handed her the lily she was holding, saying that removing its petals would mean they had officially formed a contract. Trembling, the girl took the lily in her hands, and then Yomi said that everyone she held a grudge against would be instantly sent to hell. The girl said nothing, so Yomi continued. However, after releasing her grudges, her soul would also fall. She was startled and asked what that meant, and Yomi explained that cursing others increased her negative karma, and she would not experience anything but pain and despair. Whether she removed the petals or not was her decision. This made the girl extremely nervous and indecisive. So we return to the present, where she finishes telling the story by saying that when she woke up, she was already back in her room. Activating an unknown ability, Kinsey saw a black flame inside the girl's chest. It was a curse, the price for having taken the lives of others. The woman asked if she had been in contact with other people in the last 2 days, and if there was anything unusual about them, but she replied no. Analyzing, Kinsey thought that this curse didn't seem to be contagious. It only affected the person who was under contract, so she raised her arm. Chai Xiaoying's level of spiritual power was still too low. She couldn't see the curse, so she had to handle this alone. Watching, the assistant wondered what the woman had discovered to make her want to use her stealing powers. It was said that that hand had the power to steal anything, whether physical or conceptual. Kinji told the girl not to move because she was going to remove the curse. The cost of using that ability was that something from the user would also be stolen, but it wouldn't be clothing or a personal object. On the contrary, the ability stole something from the user's body. It could be their liver or even their heart. The curse was being removed until, at one moment, the girl screamed when the curse exploded inside her body. The windows of the principal's office shattered, and the assistant shouted Kinji's name. The noise caught the protagonist's attention, who also activated his own ocular ability, scanning the entire building and the people within it. He heard someone asking what had happened, and another person replied that the window of the principal's office had exploded. He also heard rumors about Ishiguro's death and Guriya being called into the office. The protagonist recognized that name as belonging to the first person to contact Yomi. But in the days that had passed during the girl's hesitation to form the contract, the number of people who had spoken to her had increased drastically. He had created some psychological barriers to prevent unnecessary deaths, but still, nearly 100 juvenile delinquents had died in the city. This was huge. The legend of Yomi had truly surpassed the legend of the eyes, but the points he received for it were relatively low. In other words, in the notebook's view, cases of school bullying were not as severe as domestic violence, so he received fewer points for them. Even so, judging by the trend, he wouldn't have to worry about his lifespan for a while, as he now had 99 days. Because of this, the night before, he had tried to increase his mysterious spiritual powers using some of his points. He spent 1 point of kindness and 1 of malice to gain 1 point of spiritual power, but it didn't seem like anything had really changed. Then he began spending his points, trying to increase them even further until he noticed a difference in his powers. He added 9 points at once, but this pushed his body beyond its limits, and he immediately passed out. Back in the present, the protagonist leaps down the staircase. Thinking that after waking up today, he realized his senses had greatly heightened and his physical abilities had multiplied as well, reaching the bottom of the stairs in just 1 jump. The boy thinks that as long as he can keep writing, he could become a superhuman with an infinite lifespan. Kinji explains to the girl that her curse is bound to her soul and cannot be removed, but fortunately, it is not contagious, so she will be fine. Then she continues observing from a distance, believing that it's best not to get involved in this situation. The woman goes on to explain that she will report the girl's actions as self-defense. Overcome with emotion, the girl thanks her. Turning her back, Kinji calls her assistant to leave, and the student bows to say goodbye. For an instant, Kinji turns back, her eye activated, making the MC realize that she had noticed him. The assistant asks the woman if something is wrong, and she says she had the feeling that she was being watched. Zenshi was hiding behind a wall, shaken by the situation, since that woman had the ability to see curses. Feeling nervous, he wonders if she also has some kind of special ability, just like him. As she walks in his direction, she ponders whether whoever was watching her is hiding nearby, but her assistant calls out to her. Zenshi wonders if she is from the security department. Considering her conversation with the other girl, it seemed like she was investigating the Yomi girl case. She was getting closer to him, and desperate, Zenshi instinctively grips his pendant, thinking that he cannot let her discover the truth about the notebook. Her footsteps get closer and closer, and when he turns to look at her, we see his iris reflecting the silhouette of someone saying they had finally found him. Grabbing the boy by the neck, the 2 nerds from the Paranormal Activity Club suddenly appear and start holding him down in every way possible, upset that he disappeared from school right after class. They wanted to drag him back to the club, and the MC asks them to let go of him first, promising that he will come willingly, but they refuse and pull him away from the woman. Watching the situation from afar, she starts to think she had been too worried about something meaningless. Then her phone rings. Answering it, she responds, confirming her identity, then says it's fine. She's heading back now. It was probably someone high up in her department. Back in the Paranormal Activity Club room, Zenshi asks if they can finally let him go, now that he has no way to escape, and the boys agree, albeit with some complaints. They were worried that the club might be shut down due to a lack of members, so the MC apologizes for disappearing over the past few days. Turning on the room's lights, the chubby boy asks if the protagonist knows how to do anything other than sleep. He responds that he can write stories. The boy asks what kind of stories. Closing the clubroom door, Zenshi replies that they are supernatural stories. This immediately catches the boy's attention. Excited, they get closer and ask to see his stories. Apparently, they are also writers, and the MC says that his work is still just a draft. This frustrates them, and they complain that he shouldn't treat them like kids. They had already done plenty for him. The MC promises to show them once it's finished. Still acting somewhat embarrassed, the MC wonders if they would even be able to read what was written in the notebook. The chubby one says he looks uninspired and offers to help him with that. The MC tells him he shouldn't have said that, but ignoring his protest, the chubby boy starts talking about a new urban legend that has been spreading online recently. Its name was the Underworld Girl. The 2 get excited to show him this legend, but all the protagonist feels at this moment is frustration. Was he going to use his own story as inspiration for another? The chubby boy tries to access the website, but at that moment, it is offline, which confuses him. The MC also finds this strange. He asks if the internet is down, but that's not the case. They can still browse normally on their phones. The skinny one tries accessing the forum on his phone as well, but it also returns a 404 error. Thinking to himself, the MC wonders if the site might have been blocked due to the problems caused by the last urban legend he created. It was strange. Would this blockade not affect the prisons as well? Could the ones responsible for this be the 2 people he had seen earlier? Zenshi ran out of the room, while Binbin asked him why he was leaving. to which the MC replied that he needed to take a trip, running through the hallways to find something out. His path was interrupted when he saw a student being beaten right in front of him, and the one responsible for it was the very same student who had run away from him with his gang the day before. He was complaining that the boy had snitched on him to the teacher, and then he noticed Zenshi's presence. The student who was being beaten recognized him as well, and crying he begged him for help. It seemed to be the same boy he had saved before. But at that moment, the MC said he wasn't available right now, leaving the boy confused as he ran past him. He looked back, shocked at what he had just heard, but in the next instant, he was already being kicked by the gang leader, since the MC wouldn't protect him. The delinquent said that the MC didn't care about his life, so he shouldn't trust him to protect him all the time. One day, he might even beat him too. Clenching his fist in anger while his glasses lay broken on the ground. The boy bled, and we saw the reflection of the MC in his glasses as he ran down the hallway. Reaching the outside of the school, Zenshi stopped for a moment to catch his breath, wondering if he shouldn't be farther away. He decided to activate his scanning ability once more, then started listening to the conversations around him, but nothing really mattered to him. The voice he was looking for had apparently vanished, but he understood that the fact that they had managed to take down the forum could be a problem for him. He needed to uncover their identities, otherwise he would have trouble creating new urban legends, and if he couldn't extend his lifespan, things would get really bad for him. We learned that the woman's name was Okiji, and someone was explaining to her that they had done as she had asked in Shutdown Forum R. She said they had done well and asked about the infernal communication website, but the assistant explained that they had tried a connection test, but they couldn't take the site down. Okiji said it was as if strange regulatory forces were protecting the site, and she ordered the place to be cleared immediately and everyone inside the building to be removed. The assistant didn't understand anything, but Okiji said that at midnight tonight, they would attempt to shut the site down. Someone asked about the origin of this officer as everyone left the building, not understanding what was happening. The assistant explained that the last series of people who had taken their own lives under her command had been taken over by Aokiji's special department. That department specialized in strange incidents that couldn't be resolved by the regular security division, so they needed to cooperate. At 11:55 p.m., the blonde assistant asked Aokiji if shutting down a website was really that dangerous, and she responded with another question. How many days had she trained? Nervous, the girl answered that she had trained for 3 days, and Aokiji murmured that the higher-ups had sent her a mere rookie, leaving the girl speechless. 11:56 p.m. The girl exclaimed that she hadn't deliberately hidden the fact that she was a rookie, but Aokiji didn't care about that. The problem was something else. Several experienced assistants were actually dying. The woman asked if the assistant had taken lessons on ghosts and specters, and the girl said yes. Ghosts are the remnants of people who died accidentally or naturally. They are basically harmless and are usually easy to overcome. Resentful spirits are formed when a soul doesn't dissipate and condenses together with its grudges. If encountered, those with strength should simply destroy them outright. If a person doesn't have the strength to do so, it's best to just run as far as possible and find someone who can defeat them. As for monsters, all the assistant knew was that they were existences incomprehensible to humanity. Despite that, she was fully convinced that all supervisors were fully capable of eliminating any of these anomalies. Aokiji let out a slight laugh and said she would now tell her a cruel fact. For humans, anomalies are not just unsolvable, they are impossible to kill. Only monsters can fight against other monsters and be strong enough to destroy them. And what's left for humans? Only finding the rules for the annihilation of anomalies, avoiding being killed by them, and identifying the patterns of elimination rules to confine them to a specific area. Aokiji asked the girl if she knew why she had been sent to be her assistant. Even after training for only 3 days, she would serve as a test subject. Investigating these events could be very dangerous. Earlier at school, she was supposed to test the curse, but as a novice, she had been unable to even see it. Finally, it is midnight, and then Aokiji stands up from her chair, instructs her assistant to sit in it, focus her spiritual power, and press enter on the keyboard. She didn't need to worry if she ended up dying. Her family would receive compensation of 5 million gold. Nervous, the girl starts trembling but obeys her superior's command. She slowly moves her finger toward the keyboard until the woman tells her that she could give up everything and leave the department if she wanted to. But in the end, she does not back down and presses enter. Small sparks of energy are seen coming from her hands and the keyboard as she concentrates her power, which immediately puts Aokiji on alert. Then, a massive explosion erupts inside the office where the 2 women were. Summoning a shield, Aokiji manages to protect both herself and her assistant. But when the dust settles and she looks at the computer, it appears completely undamaged. However, its screen remains red. The girl asks Aokiji if it is finally over, but the screen keeps flashing red. Aokiji remarks that this anomaly does not seem as terrifying as she had initially thought. This confuses the girl, And then the spirit of Yomi finally emerges from the computer. Grabbing Aokiji's arm, the assistant screams, asking her what that thing is. Smoke rises from the computer screen and the ghost's face becomes visible. While Aokiji explains that the attempt to take down the site has failed, this was a warning. Turning her back on the computer, Kinsey tells the girl that she did well and instructs her to grow stronger as quickly as possible. If this truly was an anomaly, having some kind of warning system would be disastrous. This was an unprecedented discovery since the founding of the Special Department. However, this could also create rational suspicions. Taking out her phone, Aokiji simply thinks to herself that she hopes she is wrong about all of this. Someone picks up, and she calls for Hongyan, requesting assistance in investigating the Huangquan girl incident. A red-haired woman answers, offering her help as well. She responds by saying that Aokiji must have heard of a certain photo, one that had already caused the deaths of nearly 200 people, and that anyone who looked at it would die in agony. Aokiji then asks why she would even want to show her such a photo, and the other woman replies that Aokiji cannot die, so it should be fine. She wants Aokiji's cooperation because there are two strange cases happening simultaneously, and it would be best if they investigated together. Kinchi agrees but sets a condition. Hongyan must investigate the underworld girl case first, as it is the more serious one. She warns that she is hanging up, and the other one is surprised that Kinchi accepted the deal so easily. Something was off about this situation. 10 minutes before this conversation, we see the protagonist writing in his cursed notebook, trying to temporarily restrict the Yomi girl legend. This was frustrating him. He knew that the security department could attempt to block the infernal communication site. He could tell by reading the notebook, and it seemed that these people belonged to an organization that dealt with mysterious events. If such a thing truly existed, it was a major problem. A notification appears on his computer when the clock strikes midnight. The infernal communication site pops up on his screen. It had not been blocked. The notebook reveals that an attempt to shut down the site had been made by Chi Xiaoyin, Kinti's assistant, but it had failed. Relieved, the MC thinks that this is good news, as it means he still has a chance to keep spreading the legend without any trouble, thus increasing his lifespan. Since they couldn't take down the site, they also couldn't restrict the underworld girl, but he was still curious about those two women. Typing on his keyboard, he tries to research the Special Department of Jiangxi, but his search yields no results. There was no discussion about it anywhere. Not even the forums seemed to know that such a department existed. Still suspicious, the MC gets up from his chair and steps away from the computer, realizing that he cannot underestimate this department if he wants to stay alive. He needed to keep increasing his spiritual power, so he begins meditating again. However, he had already reached his body's limit. Unwilling to give up, he wonders what kind of condition his body will experience this time, then starts increasing his spiritual points to strengthen himself further. This strengthening was his only guarantee of survival. His room is engulfed in a vivid red glow, the energy constantly radiating from around him. He was the epicenter of this immense concentration of power. Forcing his body further and further, the room was filled with strong winds and supernatural energy, until he began to feel a difference, as if his body was expanding and his power was growing inside him. The notebook indicated that he had successfully been promoted, and then he realized it wasn't his body that was expanding, it was his soul. He stood up, seemingly having completed his strengthening ritual. Now he no longer had any side effects like before. On the contrary, he felt better than ever. Something caught his attention, so he looked toward his bedroom door, wondering why he had the feeling that someone was watching him. Several eyes appeared, raising the question, could he become a victim of his own urban legend? He thought to himself that he had already been able to sense this gaze on him before, but only occasionally. Now that his spiritual power had increased, he could perceive exactly where that gaze was coming from. He placed his hand on the wardrobe doors, quickly swung them open, and saw a box inside. He muttered to himself that he had almost forgotten that something had been there for a long time. The box cracked open slightly, and a faint red light glowed from within. Picking up the box with his hands, he wondered why it seemed so nervous. After all, it was his own creation. The box tried to escape from him, but when the boy grabbed it firmly to take it out of the wardrobe and placed it on the floor, suddenly something made him break into a cold sweat. The box snapped open without warning, and the MC delivered a powerful kick to it, sending it flying. Then he saw what was inside the box, those very same eyes from the first curse he had created, and they were staring directly at him. The TV was playing an episode of Teletubbies, and inside the box, a small, one-eyed creature peeked out timidly. It took on a cute posture and let out a soft, melodic sound, when suddenly, a scent caught the creature's attention. The boy called the monster Little Eyes and asked if it wanted a midnight snack instead of just watching cartoons. This caught the creature's interest, which then retreated back inside the box, while the MC commented that he didn't want it to get bored. He also asked if the monster wanted to go for a walk, but the creature trembled constantly, calling out for its mother. Sighing, the MC thought that despite looking terrifying, This creature was nothing more than a timid child, so he started eating alone while little eyes watched. Then his phone rang. He answered while still slurping his ramen. Someone on the other end shouted, asking why he hadn't replied to the messages faster and urging him to hurry up and check out a live stream. A streamer was exposing the murder rules of the underworld girl and confronting his audience with this shocking information. The protagonist was confused, and then the person on the phone explained that the streamer planned to meet the underworld girl in person during the live stream. Now on the open stream, the streamer didn't seem like a normal guy at all. He calmed the audience down and said that he wanted the girl to take them all away, since they were all in such a hurry. The best part of the show was about to begin. The chat was buzzing with excitement, and the streamer trembled like a bamboo stalk. He explained that many people had entered the names of those they hated into the infernal communication website, but the girl never appeared, so they assumed she didn't exist. The protagonist watched the entire scene in silence. The streamer continued, saying that they were all wrong. They had not fulfilled the conditions to meet her. To encounter the girl, one needed to harbor deep resentment in their heart. One had to have completely lost their sanity. The boy was utterly unhinged, laughing hysterically, as he finished explaining that these were the rules to meet Yomi girl. His chat behaved like a cult, descending into madness along with him. Watching with a slight smile, the MC thought that this guy had really understood the rules of the legend and wondered if he would actually be able to summon her. 12:30 a.m. at Happiness Residence. Two women, Aokiji and the redhead, whose name had slipped his mind, were watching the live stream of the streamer attempting to contact Yomi girl. Aokiji was in touch with her team, providing the streamer's address and informing them that they could move in to arrest him. The redhead asked if she really thought what the streamer was saying was true, and Aokiji said it was possible. A few days ago, the special unit had used some criminals as test subjects in an attempt to summon Yomi girl, but it had failed. She had found that quite strange, but now it seemed that the resentment of those criminals hadn't been as strong as it had initially appeared. That streamer seemed to be someone who had managed to decipher the rules for summoning Yomi girl. Even though ordinary people do not have spiritual powers, they should not underestimate those who do. Those who understand the rules behind these murders and survive them may be stronger than supervisors who possess only spiritual power. Speaking to the audience, the streamer says that he knows some people do not believe him, but he will make them witness the truth with their own eyes. He tells everyone to pay close attention to what is about to happen, and finally he presses enter. The screen finally displays the text box with the message, "I will help you dispel your resentment." Many viewers comment in amazement during the live stream, eager to see what he will do next. The streamer says that he has finally achieved what he had been longing for. Swallowing hard, he tells his audience that they will soon witness the underworld girl, but he won't reveal her just yet. But then, as he turns to look, the computer screen begins glowing even more brightly, and suddenly, he hears several voices laughing. The sound fills him with terror, and sweat drips down his face. This was the moment when everyone would finally witness the truth about Yomi girl, and so he sends the message. Suddenly, the boy's live stream is cut off. Many people are left confused, trying to understand what had just happened. The MC checks his notebook and sees that the live stream was taken down, which leaves him slightly puzzled. His notebook begins glowing intensely, and then he starts asking who is there, whether it is Jun-an or Xiao-yan. But then, an eerie and shadowy landscape appears within the notebook. A pair of legs appear above the protagonist behind him, and we see a girl floating just behind his back. He turns to look. It was the underworld girl, and this makes the protagonist wonder why she would appear before him at this moment. In the utility study room, we see a slightly open door and an eye peering through, trying to see what is happening inside. One of the protagonist's classmates is behind the door, desperately crying and begging to be freed. His phone slips from his pocket. The screen shatters. We see that his wallpaper was a photo of him with his parents. He turns to look at his phone, and as he reaches out to pick it up, he starts muttering that everyone here deserves to die and go to hell. Screaming, he repeatedly shouts that everyone should go to hell while still sobbing uncontrollably, until something catches his attention and makes him stop his frantic repetition. He begins to recall being beaten by one of his tormentors while someone spoke about an urban legend, about an underworld girl that was growing increasingly popular. The one saying this was his abuser, who mocked him, suggesting that the boy probably wanted to write his name on that site while continuing to beat him. He takes a punch to the face, as his abuser yells that if he even dared to think about something like that, he would send him to hell first. The boy screams that he would never do it. His aggressor smirks, saying that he would love to know whether the legend is actually real. Then he comments about Shinji watching him get beaten without lifting a finger to help. The blonde bully asks if he hated the protagonist for that situation, all while relentlessly continuing his assault. The memories of being ignored by the MC cause the boy's resentment to grow stronger and stronger. Hatred fills his mind as he continues getting beaten, until he screams that he hates him, repeating it over and over while staring at his phone screen. which now glows a sinister red. He had written the protagonist's name on the infernal communication website. This was why the underworld girl had appeared before him. Shinji looks at her and asks if she has come to take him to hell, but she does not answer immediately. Closing her eyes, she finally responds, no. Even though someone had written his name on the site, her abilities belong to him. This makes Shinji realize that even if someone forms a contract with her, she alone decides whether or not to fulfill it. Understanding this, he asks her who had written his name on the site. The girl responds, Kenichioshin. Confused, he repeats the name, trying to remember who she is talking about, but he cannot recall anyone by that name. Theorizing, he runs through different possible scenarios in his mind, trying to piece together who this person could be. Even the possibility of it being someone from the mafia crosses his thoughts. If he canceled the contract and informed the boy that he would not be sent to hell, the MC knew he risked falling into the hands of the special division. So, the best option was to send him to hell, but he wanted to find him first. The girl nodded in obedience and began forming a hand seal, reaching the boy and waking him from his trance. He stood up, finding himself in a desolate place, wondering where he was. The underworld girl appeared before him, this time holding a lantern, which made the boy desperate as he asked why he was there in hell. He said he had removed the pedals to form the contract with her, but someone said, welcome. A mask, whether of a dragon or a demon, it was unclear, spoke, asking if he was really Kin Xioshin. He wanted to know about the name Shinji that he had written on the site. In despair, the boy asked why Shinji wasn't there. He wasn't ready to die. The one who should be here was Shinji. He screamed, asking if he had been cursed along with the person whose name he had written. But suddenly, several small souls began devouring him bit by bit, making him scream in fear and despair, begging for help, pleading for someone to save him. The girl approached Tien with a terrifying expression, ordering him to answer the questions. A skeletal hand rose, emanating a red fire. In the middle of his torment, the boy finally gave up and agreed to answer, explaining that he had once been helped by someone but was later ignored. If that person hadn't refused to help him, Janren would never have beaten him again, nor locked him inside the utility closet. The masked man then asked the boy if he hated Shinji just because of that situation. He went on to explain that he had created the underworld girl to make people like him stand up to their aggressors, but he hadn't had the courage to point his weapon at those who were truly the source of his pain. Instead, he had aimed it at the one who had helped him. The boy who had actually hurt him would be punished, but he himself could not escape the punishment he truly deserved. Sobbing and screaming, the boy cried that no, he didn't want to suffer the consequences of his actions now because he hadn't known he was wrong. He started to admit his mistake, but his vision gradually darkened until he finally opened his eyes again, finding himself back in the utility closet, with his phone lying beside him. At the home of the streamer who had been captured by the special division, Aokiji held one of Yomi girl's flowers in her hands and asked the other woman to use her spiritual power on it. As she brought her hand close to the red spider lily, she felt an intense heat, so hot it burned her hand. Aokiji said she understood now that only the one who had summoned Yomi girl could open the petals of the flower, so they needed to be careful. The redhead asked why Aokiji didn't try to steal its power with her hands, but she replied that she had already tried to do that with a student's curse, and her mirror had warned her that if she tried to force it, she would most definitely die. Frustrated, the redhead demanded to know why she hadn't explained that before. Was she conspiring against her? But Aokiji didn't respond and simply told her she could leave. This left the redhead feeling a bit confused and suspicious, but she quickly brushed it off as a joke, and then they started dragging the streamer they had arrested across the floor as they left. While all this was happening, the protagonist was able to observe everything through a hologram created by the notebook. Don't waste time, let's take him and go. Hong Yin said this with a smile, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes, betraying a subtle fear. Janshin had always wondered if extraordinary beings truly existed in this world. If they did, how strong were they? Could they destroy the legends? They had already managed to track down Xiao Yan and Xiao Ai. Fortunately, they hadn't discovered anything yet, but he needed to keep monitoring them. The underworld girl noticed something and told her master that another mission had arrived for her. He acknowledged it and she departed. Now in the interrogation room of the special division, the detained individual was calling someone a murderer. Aokiji asked the redhead why the man was calling her that. What had she done to him? She said it was probably because she had killed his daughter. Aokiji asked if it had been some strange accident. The redhead recounted that this had happened when she first joined the special division. She had gone out shopping and sensed a strange aura around the man's daughter. At that time, she had despised strange occurrences more than anything, and the moment she started following the girl, the anomaly had noticed her presence. That student should have been dead a long time ago, but her body was being possessed by that strange entity, so she was killed. Before dying, she screamed. She kept screaming, begging not to be killed by the red-haired one, and she was recounting this story with a peculiar sense of satisfaction. The man continued shouting, cursing the red-haired one for killing his daughter, but she tells him that she will now give him a chance to take revenge. She shows him a website, which he immediately recognizes as Infernal Communication, and she tells him that if he enters her name there, she will go to hell. The man yells for Aokiji to arrest the red-haired one, who is actually a man, and she orders everyone in the room to leave first. Outside, the assistant asks if it was really okay to leave those two alone inside the room. The woman explains that no one else could be present, as the conversation involved important secrets of the special division, which leaves the assistant confused. She then explains the existence of an item called the death file, which can instantly kill a person by placing their name and photo inside it. Because of this, both she and Hongin use pseudonyms. Only the highest ranks of the department know their real names. The assistant still wants to protest, but Aokiji orders her to put aside her personal feelings. Such things have no place in this organization. That man had been suffering from mental instability since his daughter's death and had been arrested after assaulting his wife. He needed a useful way to die. As the three of them stare at the room's door, it begins glowing red. Aokiji activates her special eye, and then something leaves her completely stunned. She sees someone receiving a lily from Yomi girl's hands as they begin to fade away. At that moment, the girl turns her head, sensing Aokiji's presence. This immediately ejects her from the domain, weakening her from the shock and startling her colleagues as well. They ask what's wrong. When she turns to assure them that she's fine, a strange figure appears behind the assistant, gesturing for her to say nothing. Her face turns pale. She realizes that all of this was a warning. It was time to re-enter the room, but her mind still clung to the hope that this was not an actual warning. If that entity had truly noticed their presence, it confirmed her suspicion that it had awareness. She only prays that Hongin does not die. Inside Yomi girl's domain, we see Hongin tied to something resembling an altar. He wakes up, questioning if this was truly hell, and then the girl appears in front of him, slightly startling him. From a distance, the MC watches them and thinks that since they risked their lives to test this legend, he will show them something. He commands Xiaoai to begin the procedure. Immediately, the girl's face vanishes into a dark, terrifying shadow as she extends her hand toward Hongin. Placing her finger on the man's forehead, he suddenly feels like he is sinking into an abyss of countless hands pulling him downward, dragging him into the depths, never to return. The MC's mask appears before him, now enormous in size, watching him as he is seized by infernal hands. Was this the end of Hongin? So this was truly hell. He still stood before that demonic mask, which stared at him and spoke. All who seek hell have already arrived. Dark tendrils tighten more and more around his body, filling him with immense terror, until suddenly he finds himself lying in a boat being ferried by the girl. He starts to think that he had clearly seen something horrifying. Looking to the side, now from the boat, he spots a tall shadow. It was that demon that had been watching him before. Terror overtakes him once again, and then he sees something dreadful, shocking, and awe-inspiring all at once. The moment he lays eyes on it, his willpower vanishes completely. This was truly hell. These are his last thoughts as he plunges down a waterfall, straight into the real underworld. Someone watches as he opens his eyes and feels relieved to see him awake. Holding his head as if in pain, he says that it's good to be back. While Aokiji asks if he discovered anything interesting while he was there, Hongin speaks of the waterfall leading to hell and describes being surrounded by darkness, losing all his senses, and feeling like a lonely ghost. As his consciousness faded, his connection to the shadow weakened as well. So he called upon his shadow to pull his soul back. This was Hongin's ability. He could use his shadow to replace his soul in the event of death. He commented that the most terrifying thing of all was that the underworld girl seemed to have self-awareness. Terrified, he saw that the girl's hands seemed to have taken hold of him, warning him about something. Hongin kept murmuring that this was impossible. And this made Aokiji recall the moment when that shadow had warned her not to speak. It was as if there was something in hell that he couldn't perceive clearly, something akin to another anomaly. Aokiji told the boy that that was enough, but he was still unresponsive, shaking his head as he questioned what they should do next. He asked if she would continue following her own rules now that she was self-aware, but Aokiji's concern was something else. She feared that the existence of another anomaly in hell could bring about the complete end of the world, so she left the room, determined to inform her superiors. Back in hell, the underworld girl asked if this was really a good idea, but he only wanted to demonstrate his powers so they would stop interfering. If she actually killed the boy, it might only cause more trouble for the both of them. The girl seemed to understand what he meant, but something in the notebook caught the MC's attention. The girl had been identified by the special department, and the biggest problem with that was that he still knew very little about this department itself, but apparently, they had the power to deal with spiritual threats. Even though Hongin believed he had escaped from hell thanks to his ability, Xiaoai's rules were still very strange and had certain loopholes. He still wanted to grow stronger and use his points to extend his lifespan. While he was deep in thought, he was being observed by his own creations. Shinji then asked Xiao Ai if Hongyan could have escaped from there without their intervention, but she replied that he had not escaped. This confused him, and he said the boy hadn't died. But she answered that according to his own rules, his contract had been completed because his soul remained in hell. According to the rules, as long as a person's soul stayed in hell, they were considered dead. Could he have split his soul, or was there an alternative to his death? Or perhaps there was another ability derived from spiritual power that had developed to a certain point, allowing someone to escape from the underworld girl's eyes and ears. Tugging at his shirt to get his attention, she pointed at the notebook and asked what God meant. The boy also looked at the notebook, and then the scene shifted to a corridor. It looked like a laboratory hallway, and it was unsettling to look at. A person walked through it, holding a paper with a photo of a girl on it. He entered a door on the right. Inside, there was a table with a cup and a red string running through it. It looked like a children's string phone. The man approached the table where the cup sat, and the red string seemed to be glowing slightly. Then it began to levitate, and the man spoke, "Voice of the world." He picked up the string phone and asked what would happen to the underworld girl if this god were to devour her. The cup responded that the god's power would increase significantly. The man spoke again, asking whether the number of self-aware anomalies in this world was few or many. Still floating before him, the cup took a moment to respond, but eventually said that there were few. That man was the chief of the special department in the city of Kang. His name was Ping Jiang. He declared that he voted in favor of the devouring plan. Then we saw a photo of the underworld girl with a massive X marked over it. His words were heard by many people in a conference room. They seemed to be the true leaders of the organization. Someone spoke up, saying they still had objections to this. One of them asked whether it was possible to communicate with the underworld girl. That was Mr. Tian. He didn't want to always rely on this devouring god, as it could be dangerous. Another member pointed out that even if they could speak with this anomaly, could she really be convinced to stop killing? That was Mr. Xiang. Taking the lead in the discussion, a third elderly man stated that the underworld girl's killing rules had been in human hands from the very beginning. Rule number 1, only those who have been deeply wronged can contact her. Rule number 2, the time of her appearance is between midnight and 1 a.m. Rule number 3, only the one who commits the killing can open the petals that seal the contract and initiate the task. Rule number 4, the anomaly's domain is limited to the city of Zhang Xiaolong. Was it possible that she could control these rules herself now that she was self-aware? Mr. Tian stands up, saying that he will go talk to her. But then, all the gazes at the table turn toward him, making him nervous, and he apologizes, explaining that he had lost his head for a moment. The old man says that he has always admired his personality and that the research center needs more people like him, but he shouldn't forget that he only had one life. Tian sits down again, while the old man approaches his chair, saying that they could not allow eccentric thoughts to exist there. If the god couldn't destroy the girl from the underworld in the end, he might end up considering his idea. Pan thinks that this plan would not fail because everyone who had been controlled by the god, whether anomalies or humans, had been killed. None of them were spared. God was the most inexplicable of all anomalies. The next day arrives, and with it, the 3 members of the Paranormal Activity Club see something that leaves them completely confused. Several people are standing in front of their club room door, probably wanting to sign up and join the club. Several people are arguing when they notice the presence of the club members, and then they all start staring at them. This makes the other 2 boys very nervous, calling out the protagonist's name until he yells for the 3 of them to start running. A massive chase begins, with many wanting to know if they had any knowledge about the girl from the underworld, while the 3 try to escape. After about 5 minutes of running, the boys finally manage to lose them and are resting on a staircase. Their club suddenly became popular. After everything that happened with the forum, they were frustrated with all this attention. Then a woman appears, asking how they are doing. We know it's a woman because there's no way it could be a man in this image, or could it? The girl, who is very beautiful, asks if they are from the Ghost Club and if she could apply for membership. One of them immediately recognizes her. She had already applied to join the club before, and the chubby one quickly runs to greet her. Her best friend was also interested in urban legends, so she asks once again if they could join the club, and they all shout yes. They were really excited to meet the girl and her friend, so they immediately try to exchange contacts with her, which makes her a little nervous. The MC was about to speak with them, but at that moment, his necklace notifies him that he has received a new message. Looking a little more closely at the boys who were talking, he notices something strange about the girl's phone and approaches, asking if she was talking to her mentioned friend at that moment. She replies that she was actually in a group chat discussing a game that had recently become very popular. The goal was to find some friends or strangers to form a group where they would receive a random number and share their stories. Many people played this game because it livened up the atmosphere, and there was no pressure or need to comfort others. They called this game Now It's Your Turn. Back at his house, the MC was thinking about his spiritual ability to sense anomalies. This made him wonder if the girl's phone could be an anomaly in some way. Opening his notebook, a message says that if he starts feeling something different, he should stay away from it and not be curious. It was as if it was warning him, but before he had time to think much about it, his phone rings. When he picks it up, he sees that the girl, named Sin Hui, is asking if they could play tomorrow at the club. Ping Ping asks if it was any kind of game. Behind him, the child anomaly he had created starts expanding its tentacles behind the boy, but it only wanted to hug him. Shinji apologizes to it and says he will play with it later, asking it to wait a little. This makes Xiaoyan a little frustrated, so he starts trying to get the boy's attention by throwing himself on top of him, wanting to play. He starts laughing, but then his notebook glows red. Xiaoyan covers the boy's eyes, saying it was a surprise. A part of his body begins to move away from the boy, toward the table. With great effort, he manages to climb up, and then asks Shinji to look. Out of nowhere, Xiaoyan starts glowing red in a terrifying way, until he finally completes his transformation, turning into a mini Cyclops. This makes the boy quite satisfied, seeing that his little monster had evolved, and then the MC's phone screen appears again, with a message from Sin Hui asking them to play the game she had mentioned at school earlier. The phone starts emanating a strange aura, as if that anomaly he had seen earlier was contaminating the protagonist's cell phone. We are in an abandoned factory with the boys from the Ghost Club. Ping Ping finds the place very amusing while the other one is taking some pictures. Shinji asks them to stop yelling. He was holding his phone in his hand, wondering what kind of place this was. How long had this building been abandoned? The boys were excited. Ping suggested considering this the first official meeting of the club, while the other one was thrilled because there were now 2 girls with them. Sin Hui arrives, apologizing for being late. The boys turn around, happy to greet them, until they hear a boy's voice introducing himself as Kai Heron, completely frustrating the other 2 when they realize that their best female friend was actually a man. This makes the couple a bit embarrassed, but they say they are just good friends, causing the 2 nerds to cry in jealousy and envy for being single. Shinji watches all of this suspiciously. He seems to notice something more than what we can understand yet, but he says nothing. He asks why they had to be in such a depressing place to play a game that was supposed to be online. He was really suspicious of her, and he was trying to figure out what was wrong with this whole situation. She replies that she simply likes this kind of adventure, and the game seemed perfect for their club. The other 2 boys, excited, agree with her to dissuade the MC from asking her more questions and ask her to teach them the game. Shinji warns the 2 to be careful with these urban legends. It would be better not to play with those 2, but they don't want to listen to him. Seeing their behavior, she says she understands if they don't want to play, and her friend immediately says he will play with her. There's something off about those 2. Ping gets excited and shouts that he will join too. The 4-eyed boy threatens to remove the MC from the club if he doesn't participate, so Shinji, unwillingly, accepts. He had already understood that the girl's words had excited the other 2, so he would participate just to ensure their safety. Entering the building, Shinji asks if they can start now, and he asks the couple to explain the game rules to them. Nodding, she says she will explain, but the protagonist's mind is only wondering whether he had made the right decision about this. His necklace wasn't glowing, and he wonders if this game was an anomaly, and what the rules were. Why did this game have different levels of play? At the low level, each person in the group starts telling their own story until they say, "Number X, now it's your turn," while at the high level, it was face-to-face. The group of at least 4 people stays inside a closed room, starting with 1 player, and each takes turns telling a supernatural story. Ping already seemed to be in a complete panic, calling for his mother while using his phone screen as a flashlight, as the MC repeated the rules. If the number of people was greater than 4, then the others should occupy different spaces in the room, and following the numbered order, each one tells a story. The skinny nerd was trying to avoid looking, waiting for Binbin's appearance, until a hand approached him from behind, grabbing his shoulder and scaring him. He screams in fear, thinking it was a ghost, but it was just the chubby boy, saying that he had found him. Calming down a little, the skinny one confirms that it's the chubby boy, and then he starts telling his story. Binbin tells them that he has 2 brothers who eat and sleep together, but one of them fell into a river and died, and the second one died that same night. Do you know why? The skinny one says he doesn't know, and the chubby boy, taking an even creepier posture, continues, explaining that when he went to bed that night, he couldn't sleep because he was used to sleeping between the 2, so he decided to cut the other brother in half to place 1 half on each side. The boy starts laughing and playfully taps the skinny one, while he complains about the scare. Touching his shoulder, Binbin tells him that he is finished, and now it's his turn, number 2. He points toward a staircase. At that moment, we shift to where the MC is, sitting, waiting for someone to appear, with his necklace in his hands, but it wasn't showing any signs. The screen of his phone shows that it is completely drained, and then it shuts off, making the boy even more uneasy. Someone starts approaching from the staircase, and he sees that it's the girl. He tells her that his phone ran out of battery and asks her to turn on the flashlight. Taking her phone out of her pocket, she turns on the screen and says that she is number 4. The boy doesn't respond, but his expression shows that he is still suspicious. She then begins to tell her story. One night, 4 boys were traveling with a girl, and it was raining heavily that day. They quickened their pace to escape the rain, but the girl was not in as much of a hurry as they were. They finally reached a shelter, but the girl wasn't wet. Sinhui approaches the MC with a smile and asks if he knows why. He doesn't respond immediately, but in the next moment, he starts answering that, in fact, she was dead. He was inside a coffin, and the other 4 boys were carrying the coffin with them. Excited, Sinhui says that Shinji is amazing, and he thanks her. She asks if he has thought about the story he will tell and informs him that he needs to go down to the first floor of the building to tell it to number 1. As he passes by her, he responds that he already understood that, and then turns around to ask if she is coming with him. But she says she still needs to go to the 4th floor so as not to break the rules, and asks if he wants her phone number. Shinji replies that there's no need and tells her to be careful when going down the stairs. Descending the stairs calmly, he starts wondering where everyone is, but he lets it go, thinking that he will find them outside the building. Upon reaching the exit, he sees everyone waving at him, and he even notices the presence of Sinhui. She looks at him a bit surprised, and he asks if she was supposed to have gone to the 4th floor. Everyone looks at her, also surprised, but she says she got too scared. When Heron went up to the 3rd floor, he shouted the MC's name from the 4th floor staircase, but the MC didn't respond. They started feeling something strange, so they immediately went down to meet the other 2 boys. Hearing this, the MC becomes completely alert. There was no 5th floor in that building. Before scaring everyone, the protagonist changes his demeanor and says he was just joking. He asks if he managed to scare them, to which Bin Bin starts cursing him, complaining that he could have scared the girl. Smirking ironically, he simply responds that what makes this game exciting is exactly that. Suddenly approaching her, close enough to startle her, he teases her, saying that they could spend the night together if she was scared. She starts blushing and stammering, which makes her best friend appear slightly jealous, but that doesn't seem to intimidate the protagonist, who continues to smile. Turning his back on everyone, he simply says that the whole club can stay up all night together. After all, in these urban legends, things only start getting problematic for the characters after they separate. Sinhui refuses, saying that she isn't feeling well. It would be better to go home and rest a little, and she says this while grabbing Heron's arm. She asks if he could take her home, and he says yes. The 3 boys start leaving the wanted couple alone. The 2 nerds praise the MC's performance and say they will see him tomorrow. Ping asks the protagonist if they should go back to the club room and play, and the skinny one makes up some random game. But Shinji still finds everything very strange, wondering what exactly had happened earlier. If Sinhui hadn't lied to him, then the person who spoke to him on the last floor looked exactly like her. The boy suddenly feels a presence that paralyzes him for a moment, then immediately exclaims to the other 2 that he is going back to the abandoned building to check it out. The 2 boys ask him what he wants to do, but when they return to the place together, the MC starts asking, "Where are those 2? When did they leave?" The other boys ask what he is talking about, and he explains that he is talking about Sinhui and Ki Heron. This scares the 2 nerds, as they say that only the 3 of them had been there the whole time. Nervous, Shinji stops for a moment and hears the question he didn't want to hear. Who the hell are Sinhui and Ki Heron? This makes his pendant glow brightly, while the 2 nerds scream at him, trying to understand what is happening to the MC. He starts entering the building despite their protests. Now at the special department building, Aokiji says that he is there to return the favor for their help in the case of the girl from the underworld. She had found the person who spread the photo of the eyeballs and also a picture he had taken of that eye. Hongyin is impressed by this. He takes the photo in his hands, asking if the superiors had already decided how they would deal with the girl's anomaly, but Aokiji replies that they haven't yet. Due to the restrictions of infernal communication, they will probably take a more gradual approach and won't use that method unless necessary. They will use their social power to erase the girl's existence from the underworld, employing virilization strategies to make her forgotten. If no one is talking about her, then no one will enter the infernal communication site, and even if they do, they won't be able to meet the requirements. Hongyin points out that she will still attract some attention, If someone spreads gossip about another person to keep the girl's legend alive, then people won't care if someone disappears as long as it's not them. Aokiji responds that this isn't what they should be worrying about because their superiors and the intellectual circle will take care of everything. Grabbing the handcuffs, the woman calls the redhead to go capture the person who was spreading those photos. Once sealed, those pictures would no longer be a problem. Onion agrees but quickly glances at the photo, feeling a chill run down his spine because that picture was extremely disturbing and made him feel sick. On the outskirts of the city, Aokiji approaches a man named Tianjai. He was 35 years old but had no ID. Showing him the photos of the eyeballs, she asks if he was the one who took them. The man was tied up and gagged. He had started screaming as soon as he saw the two agents from the special department and still hadn't calmed down. Onion removes the gag from the man's mouth, and in desperation he admits that he took the pictures but insists that he didn't do anything else. The redhead grabs his hair, leaving Tianji confused, but in the next instant he lets out a scream as we see a tuft of his hair being ripped out. Calmly, Onion demands an explanation about the photo. Tianji explains that he took the picture at Xiaomi's house. The boy asks who that was. He responds that she was a friend, but that wasn't important. The point was that when he went to her house, they had a pleasant conversation, if you know what I mean. But when he went to the bathroom afterward, he felt something moving inside the wardrobe in her room. Out of curiosity, he approached the wardrobe to open it while she slept in bed. And what he saw left him completely in shock. He saw something very strange, a deformed baby inside the wardrobe. Back at the abandoned building where Shinji was 2 hours earlier, he touches his pendant and calls for Xiaoai. The notebook opens, and he starts searching for some information inside it. Something was wrong, but he didn't seem to fully understand what was happening. Something behind him begins to approach, and he feels this strange presence. But when he turns around to see what it is, there is nothing there. This makes him a bit nervous, and he asks who is there, but he doesn't receive a response at first. In the next instant, he hears someone say they want to die. A pair of red eyes appears behind Shinji, repeating that they truly want to die. The strange sound he was hearing starts making him dizzy, to the point where he kneels down, clutching his head. A sharp pain makes Shinji scream, as several memories seem to shatter inside his mind. Regaining his senses, he starts questioning why he was in that place. The two boys who had stayed outside the building suddenly begin wondering why they were there. They had forgotten everything. Back to Aokiji's perspective, she stands in front of a building in the rain and knocks on the door. Someone asks who it is, and when the door opens, we see a woman in pajamas complaining about the time they are knocking on her door. But Aokiji interrupts, asking if she is Taiyome and confirming if her real name is Heshumai. She was accompanied by Hongyin and Tianjai. At first, the woman looks confused but quickly starts complaining when Aokiji enters her house without permission. The agent says she is only there to investigate her child, to which the woman asks since when she had a child. Showing the photo of the deformed baby, Aokiji asks if she recognizes the child in the picture. With a strange expression, she replies that he had died. Hongyin asks when this happened, and she says 2.5 months ago. Aokiji asks if she was the one who killed her own child, but she begins crying, saying that he was already dead when she got home. She hadn't wanted that to happen, so she placed him in the wardrobe just because she was expecting visitors. What a great example of a mother, right? After asking where the body was, the woman leads the three of them to the place where she buried it. The police begin to dig it up, and they finally find it, identifying it as a 5-year-old child already in an advanced state of decomposition. That scene was too horrifying to look at, but Hongyin asks if the woman was truly remorseful about all of it. After all, she really did want to raise her child. Aokiji explains that this child did not die of starvation accidentally. He wasn't even paying attention to the photo. This confuses the boy, but she clarifies that she only showed the woman the picture of the eyeball, not of the child. Her life will not be easy after all this. As she is placed inside the patrol car, the woman starts panicking, saying that several eyes are staring at her, which frightens the police officers. Calmly, Aokiji says that she might be pretending to be mentally ill to reduce her sentence, so they must not let her escape. The officers nod, and Hongyin says that this is simply the consequence of what she did. The child became a monster that kills abusers after having been abused in life. He even considers publicizing the whole case, but Aokiji disagrees, saying that they need to seal the photos and finally close the case, as it is now complete. We return once again to the abandoned building. The rain is falling, and Shinji is climbing the stairs, still hearing the voice saying that it truly wants to die. He seems to be possessed by some anomaly, and it is he who is speaking those eerie words. His eyes are darkened, and his pendant is still glowing intensely, until finally his eyes return to normal, and he realizes that there is a monster behind him. Turning quickly to try to strike it, he sees an extremely strong creature, but he still manages to hit it and knock it down the stairs. He starts running to escape and calls out for Xiaoai. He is completely confused because he feels like he was controlled by something up until now. He shouldn't have come with them. A laugh is heard from his phone, and someone asks where he is, calling him to come to her. Suddenly, the MC freezes in the middle of the staircase. That monster seemed to be truly powerful. Footsteps and handprints in red appear on the floor. And then, as he tries to look to the side despite being paralyzed, the presence begins to approach the protagonist. The anomaly calls the MC number 5 and asks where he is going, to which he demands to know who the hell she is. She responds that she is number 4, Sin Hui. The red eyes are right at the back of his neck, and the MC asks if this is her territory. She asks what he is talking about. He says he doesn't understand, but Sin Hui does not explain and simply says that it's time for them to join quickly. Still confused, what appears in front of the protagonist leaves him completely speechless. 3 coffins are before him, with the 3 boys who were with him earlier inside them. Sin Hui says that they are waiting for Shinji. Ping opens his eyes, and they are not normal. They are completely black, and he begins to rise from the coffin. The 3 zombies turn their heads backward, which terrifies the MC. He screams, asking why the 3 of them are there and begging them to wake up. He begins to wonder if the boys had already been dead when something happens, and then he starts forgetting everything again. He asks himself how he even knows their names, and whether he ever truly knew them. Hadn't he always been alone in this life? The 3 zombie boys form a circle around him, telling him that he is not alone, he is their good friend. Now it is his turn. A tangled mass of threads begins falling over Shinji, seemingly taking complete control of his being and causing him to pass out. The pendant is still in his hands, but he only responds with a simple yes. Apparently, his soul has been assimilated by the anomaly. A new coffin opens, and he enters it. The lid closes, and at last Yuan Shinji is dead. Shifting the scene, someone appears, writing in a notebook. Judging by the silhouette, it's already clear that it's a woman, but we don't know who she is. Amid the rain, she begins wondering why they haven't arrived yet. She starts biting one of her nails, then decides to take a coin and flip it into the air. It spins, and we see that one side has a spider on it. And when the coin lands, Shinji opens his eyes. Startled, he quickly gets up and realizes that he is still at home. Then rushes to the bathroom, turns on the faucet, and starts looking at himself in the mirror. Touching his face, he realizes that he is not dead, but he cannot believe what just happened. He had died, he had been killed by a monster, but he was resurrected. He had entered that abandoned building alone to investigate, but it seemed like something was missing from his mind. His memory felt completely scrambled, as if something was conflicting with logic. Even though Little Eyes was a monster he had created, he had not protected it. Shinji decides to take out his notebook to see if there were any clues about what had really happened. On the first page, he sees his status, his lifespan, and also the rules of the notebook, but he notices something strange. His lifespan was only 95 days, but it should have been 96. Why was there a missing day? The notebook informs him that he had activated the resurrection function, which allowed him to use it at the cost of 1 day of his life, a bit similar to Natsuki Subaru's skill. In his memories, the Ghost Club only had him as a member, but how could that be true? The club needed at least 3 active members to remain open. Looking around, he realizes that he was clearly not the only member of that club, yet there were no signs of the others. He feels frustrated for not being able to remember anything, but then something bangs against a wardrobe door, startling him. He asks who's there, and then a girl appears, panting. Greeting the protagonist, she introduces herself as Kan Yubai, a new student at the school interested in the supernatural who would like to join the club. He wonders if she has any powers, but he starts explaining that the club will soon be shut down due to a lack of members. Then he asks why she was hiding there. She flinches, but begins to explain that the club had other members, yet they disappeared after he went into the abandoned building. This catches the protagonist's attention, but then she hands him a notebook, and he begins to read. Inside, she writes that she followed the MC to the building. A prophecy said that the club would be fine, but in the end, something dangerous happened. Reading all of that, the protagonist starts realizing and finally remembering what had been erased from his memory. Many memories begin to return to his mind. The members Xie Binbin and Li Zhongxing, the girl Sin Hui who was under the influence of the monster, and his childhood friend, Qi Heron. All of them had been affected by the monster. He starts flipping the pages to see more, but the girl shouts for him not to look. Snatching the notebook from his hands, we see that her face is flushed. And we all know the rule, folks, if someone blushes, it means they're in love. I always say that. She apologizes, saying that there were confidential things in her diary, but she had no bad intentions. She genuinely wanted to join the club. Wondering if he should trust this girl, the protagonist takes out a piece of paper and hands it to her. It was a membership application for the club. She would have to retrieve the club key from another room and would be assigned the task of recruiting more members. Excited, she thanks him and calls him president, bowing before him in gratitude. This seems to give the MC a bit of second-hand embarrassment, but the next moment, she turns to leave and bids him farewell. Cheerfully, she skips away, humming a tune, while Shinji watches her leave the room. The girl's spiritual power was still very low, and she seemed to still be in the awakening phase. This makes him wonder what she really wanted, but that wasn't important at the moment. He then takes hold of his pendant. What mattered now was discovering the cost of the legend behind the game It's Your Turn. The next day, we hear someone saying that the safest place in the entire city of Jiang was the Ghost Club. That was why she had gone there, with the sole intention of joining the club and working hard in peace. The club president was Shinji, and he was the one who had the ability to ensure her safety. The person thinking this was none other than Kian Yubai. She wanted to complete the task he had given her to prevent the school from shutting the club down. This world was dangerous, and she needed to stay close to the MC, and if possible, try to become his girlfriend too. She needed to observe him to see if he met the criteria to be her future husband as well. The notebook showed the same status for the MC, except that his lifespan had decreased by another day. This startled him. Was it some kind of bug? Even though he was worried, he had to increase his spiritual power points. If he extended his lifespan blindly, he might eventually become immortal. After increasing his lifespan to 100 days, he starts thinking about how ridiculous it would be to become immortal in this world. In truth, he wanted to become stronger. His spirit is summoned behind him with immense power after successfully leveling up his spiritual ability. Reaching level 3 of his power, the protagonist is now able to control his abilities more efficiently, as if piloting a mecha, and even influence a certain area around him. So he decides to test his telekinetic power with some objects on the table. Like a Sith, he pulls a bag of chips toward him using his spiritual energy, and it lands in his hand. He now has the ability to control objects from a distance and amplify them as well, but only within a radius of 10 meters. Unfortunately, the cost of using this ability is 100 legend points per second, a massive price given his current situation. He could also use another resource instead of legend points to activate his power, but that price was too risky. Thinking about this, he starts considering writing another urban legend, one that could bring people back to life. However, his notebook immediately informs him that he doesn't have enough legend points for that. Going back to what happened, he remembers that the three friends never played that strange game before. Only Xin Hui did, and she was already under its influence. Trying to simulate everything in his mind, he wonders what the exact rules and death mechanics of that game are. Based on the order of the game, they were supposed to die in the following sequence: Xin Hui, Qi Heron, Exia Binbin, and Li Zhongxing. However, the order of the floors was different. Thus, the first possibility was that the order of deaths followed the participants' assigned numbers, but that only made sense for Xin Hui. As far as he knew, this was a game that could also be played online, but at that moment, she insisted that everyone play it in that abandoned building. It was as if that place was her territory. However, the legend stated that the game was online. There were no rumors about an abandoned building. Maybe the entity was just using Xin Hui to lure him into the building, which was its real domain. If that was the case, did the entity know he had spiritual powers? Finally, Shinji is home again, greeted by his one-eyed little monster. He still has many doubts about what the monster from the Now It's Your Turn legend truly is. His old game group was deleted as expected. To continue his investigation, he would have to keep playing the game. He had the power of immortality, but the other players did not. Even if these people wanted to die, he wonders if he should interfere in that kind of situation. Little Eyes snatches the phone from the MC's hands and then slaps the screen in frustration. This makes the protagonist curious, but he quickly smiles and says they can try it out, while the little monster keeps hitting the phone screen. Calling Xiao Ai again, this time she responds and asks him for his instructions. He grabs her by the arm, momentarily surprising her, and he tells her to come with him to a place, and she can leave the underworld. This is new information. Arriving at the intended location, the protagonist is completely confused. The abandoned building he had visited earlier was no longer there. Wondering how this could have happened, he considers the theory that the monster had altered his memory from the beginning, preventing him from finding the building. A giant eye appears behind the MC, and its claws seem to be almost reaching him, making him realize that the monster is far too powerful. Xiaowai pauses for a second and says there's a scent in the air, a familiar scent left by a known creature. The MC is once again confused, but the girl takes his hand and says they can't stay there. They have to go back home. Little Eyes starts murmuring to the MC, and he asks if it is confident enough to handle this kind of creature. Back home, Xiaoai sits on one couch while the MC sits on another. He clears his throat and says they are now going to play a game called Now It's Your Turn. Each of them picks up a phone to play, though he still doubts whether this will work, since it's just one human and two monsters playing. Xiaoai creates a group, assigning herself as number 1, and adds the MC and Little Eyes. The mini Cyclops is number 2, and the MC is number 3. Each of them has their story already copied onto the phone. He won't send anything himself. It will depend on whether the entity reaches their door. The phone screen already showed that it was 1:44 a.m. 5 hours had passed, and they were still waiting for something to happen. It was already the second day of waiting, and the protagonist wondered if this method would really work. He then starts talking to Xiaoai, asking if something had happened since his legend points hadn't increased recently. She hadn't received any commission requests since the last one with Hongyin, and this was making her feel uneasy. She says she might even disappear when suddenly they hear a noise that catches all three of their attention. The door of the house begins glowing red, which immediately puts all three of them on high alert as they turn to look at it. The doorknob starts turning slowly as the door begins to open. Was the thing finally arriving? The door was still opening when the thing behind began to say that it was now the turn of number 1. The protagonist asks Xiaoai if she really has the ability to deal with that anomaly. She was looking at the door, staring at a girl. Those two were great monsters, very powerful. With a giant eye, the game's anomaly begins to scream horrifyingly, causing a massive explosion of energy inside the MC's house. Xiaoai's eyes were darkened from this battle, and she says she is a little stronger than that monster, but only because she is within its rules. Even so, she wouldn't be able to defeat that monster unless the MC said its name to her. Only then could she drag it to hell. Otherwise, the power gap between them would no longer exist. Shinji understands that she cannot defeat the Now It's Your Turn because she is trapped within the monster's rules. At that moment, neither of the two monsters could affect the other. He wonders what he should do now with the game monster. Would it be better to leave the game or wait for Little Eye's turn? The game announces that it is now the turn of number 2. Little Eyes seems excited, but the MC believes he is too weak to handle that anomaly. He lets the little one act. After all, in the worst case scenario, he would be resurrected again by his return ability. The little Cyclops attacks the monster after leaping off Shinji's back and manages to grab what seems to be a cord of dark energy. Pulling this energy forcefully, we see that the monster's eye begins to scream again, but it counterattacks Little Eyes, who seems to have taken a great deal of damage. He doesn't give up and begins to summon several eyes along with him, and then countless black hands emerge from Little Eyes, grabbing the game's arms and making it scream. Little Eyes' new attack seems to have had a much more devastating effect this time, and a strange mouth appears in front of the game's eye. Little Eye's hands start pulling the monster into his mouth, and then finally he swallows it, shutting his mouth tightly. Shinji was shocked. The little one was much stronger than he had thought. This fight had ended differently than he had imagined. He had even been worried that his legend points had stagnated and that it could affect the strength of his legends, but that did not seem to be the case. Even though he was satisfied with the result of the fight, he still wondered what would happen now that he had devoured another anomaly. Would their rules combine? The notebook states that he managed to contain the It's Your Turn game monster, and that the impact of this legend would now also accumulate points for him. He resumed generating points. 1 page, 2 pages, 18 full pages. By erasing the player's memories, this legend had unconsciously taken the lives of several people. Shinji received a total of 180,000 legend points and 17,000 points of both goodness and evil. Now, the abilities of It's Your Turn belong to him. Back in reality, someone starts knocking on Shinji's door, asking if anyone is home. The person says they heard a strange noise, which puts the protagonist on alert. Why would someone be knocking on his door at 2 in the morning? He approaches the door but immediately asks who is on the other side, suspicious that it might be another trick from the game monster. Thinking a bit more calmly, the notebook wouldn't have stated that he had completely contained the monster if that weren't true. Looking through the peephole, he sees someone who claims to be Xiao-san. He had just moved in and heard some strange noises, so he was worried about him. Opening the door, Shinji says that there were some pests inside his house and that he was exterminating them. The neighbor then says that's fine, and then hands over a bag he was holding, saying it was a specialty of his family and asking the protagonist to accept it. Shinji wasn't very interested, but as a goodwill gesture, he accepts it, thinking he will return the favor later. The neighbor leaves, the protagonist closes the door, places the bag of food on the table, and then walks away, saying he is going to sleep. The two anomalies he had created go to see what's inside the bag. Shinji asks if they want to eat it, but neither of them seemed interested in eating, so he says he'll just leave the bag there, though it seems like there might be something more to all of this. Back at the special department, Aokiji handed over the documents for the dead baby case, saying that the case was closed, while the chief acknowledged his report. As she was about to leave the room, her boss asked her to wait a moment, and she obeyed, waiting to hear what he had to say. Xiao Chang was the head of the public security department, and he was worried, saying that he had something to ask of the special department. She asked what it was, and he asked if she knew whether he had a son. That question was quite strange, and she asked what he meant by that. They weren't even considered colleagues. They weren't that close. The chief suddenly stood up and apologized, but he had been feeling a strong sense of uncertainty in recent days. Aokiji seemed curious about this but didn't say anything. He continued, saying that he and his wife obviously had no children, but then why was there a boy's room in his house? At first he thought he was just too stressed from work and had forgotten that it could be a future child's room. But there were clear signs that someone had lived there. Magazines, snacks, clothes. Everything indicated it belonged to a boy around 16 or 17 years old. This really caught Aokiji's attention, and she asked about the boy's age to confirm if he was a student. From what I understand, this is Seobinbin's father, who had been erased from memory. The next day arrives, and we see the street where Shinji's house is located. He was walking along the sidewalk when his phone started ringing. He saw that he had received a message from Kiman Yubai, that cute girl with glasses who wanted to be the MC's wife. She said that the Minghu apartment was in danger. It was the building where Shinji lived, and that left him in doubt. Hadn't he already dealt with the monster yesterday? Still uncertain, he began considering the possibilities. Was it just a part of the building or the whole place? The notebook didn't indicate any danger. Investigating the entire building would be too much trouble, and that thought bothered him throughout his walk. Right after that, while he was still walking, the protagonist was approached by a woman asking if he was Yuon Shinji, and with her were Cheik Xiaoyan, Aokiji, and Hongyan. They introduced themselves as members of the security department. This surprised the MC and put him on alert. Shinji wasn't prepared to deal with the special department at that moment, but he didn't lose his composure and asked what they wanted. The red-haired man stepped closer and asked if he knew someone named Seobinbin, who was a former member of the ghost club he had been part of. At first, Shinji didn't answer, but eventually he admitted that he knew him, and Aokiji asked if he knew how Seobinbin and the other boys had disappeared. Shinji responded that this wasn't a very convenient place to talk, so he invited them to his home, turning his back on them. The next moment he was surrounded by the three of them, and Aokiji said there was no problem. They could talk right there since no one would be eavesdropping. Still calm, Shinji turned to Aokiji and said that even so, it was better to talk at his place, otherwise she wouldn't be able to ask for anything there. He also asked them to request a permit for him, which made Hongyan irritated with him. Cheik Xiaoyan held him back while Aokiji told him to shut up, and the protagonist started walking toward his apartment. She noticed that even though Shinji was caught off guard, he remained calm during the encounter. He must have realized that if he acted like a normal person, he would be coerced. And even though he was just a student, his calm and carefree mind would be enough for him to be considered for admission into the special department. Not to mention that his spiritual power had already reached the 3rd level, and she could see that with her special eye. They arrived at the building's elevator, and finally at the MC's home. Shinji said he could tell them anything, but he had questions to ask first. Someone agreed to his demand. Shinji's experience already made him capable of handling the situation, but the information he had was incomplete, so having others to help clarify things was useful. This would allow him to step beyond just theorizing about everything and understand the situation more practically, leading to the best decision. Surprising everyone, the MC started the conversation by saying that he believed they weren't really from the security department. This caught the three off guard. Continuing his little act, he spoke as if he were merely guessing that they were from the special department, which made Hongyan and Cheik Xiaoyan nervous, but Aokiji didn't seem affected by the information and calmly sipped her coffee. Smiling, he simply said that it seemed like he had guessed right and had managed to deceive them. After all, with so many strange things in this world, it was very likely that there was a department that dealt with all of them. Hongyan gets irritated again and tries to lunge forward to beat up the protagonist, but he remains calm. Cheik Xiaoyan manages to restrain him while the MC continues to provoke him. Calming the situation, Aokiji explains that she really is from the special department, and no matter how much he thought he knew about them, she had something important to tell him. Despite these monsters having rules, they could not eliminate them. At most, they could only contain them. Even if they had potential, he couldn't afford to take this matter lightly, or else he could be killed by them at any moment. The MC falls silent and simply observes. Aokiji starts by asking if he and his friends had seen an eyeball, but he starts talking about the game instead, which makes the woman quite curious. He says he wants answers first, and if she tells him what he wants to know, he will tell her everything he knows. She gives a small smile, realizing that the MC was indeed a boy with great potential, as he knew how to create a disadvantageous situation and turn it into a favorable negotiation for himself. However, he hadn't encountered that many monsters in his life yet and lacked experience, so she asks what he would like to know. Spiritual power. He wants to know what happens after reaching the third stage and what kinds of abilities appear in the next stages. Aokiji replies that there are no new abilities. Increasing one's spiritual power only expands the range of their spiritual pressure. The stronger the spiritual power, the greater the reach of that pressure. Shinji wants to know if it makes sense to keep expanding his spiritual power since he can't attack monsters, but Aokiji says it's actually the opposite. They need to increase their spiritual power because their lives are always at risk. But before talking about that, she wants to know how he survived the game. He replies that he played the game twice before finding a way to avoid death. It had something to do with his ability. Confident in his response, Shinji asks if they can now return to the previous topic. Aokiji wonders if his ability could be the same as Hongyin's, which was the substitution of death. This catches the attention of the other two as well. Increasing power enhances the quality of the soul. To deal with monsters, they needed something similar to what they had. However, this power came at the cost of losing their soul little by little. The more power one accumulates, the greater the soul's quality, which corresponds to how many times one can use their power. That was why they needed to keep increasing their spiritual power. Aokiji sits on the sofa next to the protagonist. Shinji was silently drinking his coffee, but then he looks to the side to observe her. Aokiji asks if he still has any doubts, but he hasn't finished drinking yet to respond. Shinji realizes that his two creations are restricted, and it could have something to do with them. They wouldn't mess with Little Eyes yet, but Xiao might be in danger here. He then asks how they contain monsters if they can't kill them, and since they keep appearing, will humanity eventually be annihilated? Hongyan, acting strangely, simply asks if they can't have monsters that can kill other monsters. That sentence captures the boy's attention. Maybe he was starting to wonder how they would use those monsters, but he says nothing about it. The MC gives a slight smile, saying that all his questions have been answered, and now he will give them all the information he has about the game. Taking out a piece of paper from inside his clothing, he places it on the coffee table and begins to explain that the game is called Now It's Your Turn. But in the next moment, someone starts knocking on his door, catching everyone's attention. The MC responds that he's coming, and when he opens the door, the person standing there is his neighbor, saying that he was taking care of his own things but needed a pair of scissors and asks the MC if he has one to lend him. Shinji is a little uncomfortable with his behavior, but in the next instant, he remembers Yubei's message and considers whether this is the danger she was referring to. Behind the neighbor, something very strange could be seen, as if there were a second presence behind him. The boy replies that he does and asks him to wait a moment, while the neighbor apologizes for the inconvenience. As the MC turns to fetch the requested scissors, Aokiji seems to have noticed something, but Shinji thinks that's not the case. They hadn't noticed anything strange about Xiao-san. Does everyone in this city have the name Xiao? What a lack of creativity. In the MC's imagination, either he was wrong about something being off with his neighbor, or it could be something entirely different. Maybe the neighbor was much better than everyone there. Shinji approached him with the scissors in hand to return them, thinking that perhaps he would need to investigate that guy and understand what was wrong with him. The door closed, and this time, it was the MC who apologized for the inconvenience. He explained that the man was his neighbor, but Aokiji wasn't interested in anything other than hearing about the game's story. She didn't want to waste time. He was astonished as he was the only one who had noticed something strange about the neighbor, but he chose not to say anything for now. In reality, he believed that at this moment, he could only trust himself, even though he had previously wanted their help in the investigation. Either way, there was no harm in explaining the rules of Now It's Your Turn to them, especially since, in this internet age, privacy was nearly impossible to maintain. In the end, in the boy's opinion, it wouldn't be a problem if they later realized he had given them the wrong information. At this moment, it didn't make sense to try to fight against the special department. He handed them some sheets of paper with information about the game. The three of them immediately tried to see what was written there. Excited, Hongyan snatched the paper from Aokiji's hands, eager to see the information because he wanted to solve the case alone and earn the monthly bonus. Then, Aokiji asked Shinji if he would like to join the special department. Without immediately refusing, the MC asked what benefits he would get by being part of their force. She replied that she could help him understand what he wanted to know. Hongyan spoke about the monetary benefits, while Kinji explained the support benefits provided by the special department. He would have the freedom to act first and report later. The only thing he couldn't do was indiscriminately kill innocent people. Shinji asked about his duties, and she explained. He would have to investigate strange events and would not be able to refuse these investigations, but collaboration among investigators was possible. Additionally, all the benefits he would receive would be calculated from the moment an investigation into anomalous events began. She also explained that almost no one in the department had survived for more than 10 years. Many of them suffered from mental issues and no longer wanted to carry out their tasks. This shift exchange system was put in place precisely to ensure the proper functioning of the department, and even so, she would not force him to join. Shinji sarcastically asked if he really had a choice, to which an excited Hongyin responded that yes, there was another type of inspector, a freelancer. Join mentioned that he could even have his own team, but Hongyin quickly told her to shut up. Aokiji extended her hand and said that the enemy of humanity was the monsters, not humanity itself. After investigating monsters for years, he would realize how ridiculous the conflicts between humans really were. Shinji agreed with her and extended his hand to shake hers as well. He decided that he would become a freelance investigator and form his own team, naming it Team Ghost. He said this while remembering his friends who were still missing. Was there really no turning back for them? Hongyin was furious with Xiaoyan for telling the MC that he could form his own team as they walked away. Shinji called for his little monster, which began to emerge from his hand as Little Eye's dark energy started to emanate. Pointing forward, the protagonist thought about how, when the special department appeared, he had embedded Little Eye's power into his own body. He hadn't tested it yet, but if he had to fight against them, this hidden power could provide him with extra protection, or even eliminate them. Warning the two monsters that they were now under the special department's surveillance, he told them they would start training and strengthening themselves from now on. Little Eye's ability had been absorbed by the MC, and now he could use it on whoever he wanted. Even though, in its original form, it could only be used against abusers under the MC's control, he could use it on anyone he wished, to torture them. He also lost 100 legend points per second while using the ability. The system asked if he agreed with this, and he confirmed that he did. Still uncertain, he realized that his field of vision had improved and wondered if this was an enhancement granted by Little Eyes. However, even so, it still wasn't enough. Even if he used the power of his monsters, he couldn't kill another person. Still, he was satisfied knowing he could at least protect himself. Smiling, he calls his creations to go out into the community and look for clues about what they needed to investigate. We are in Kian Yubei's classroom, where some students are talking about visiting an antique shop that recently opened at Asakawa Mall. Yubei doesn't seem very interested in that. She is thinking about how she noticed Shinji wasn't in his classroom when she passed by to see him. She even looked for him in the Ghost Club room and searched for him in other places at school, but he wasn't there. Upon entering his classroom, she ended up finding the application form data for the Public Security Department, which made her raise some questions. Still, the girl decides to just take those documents home to analyze them and try to figure out what had happened for Shinji to be missing. Her phone suddenly starts ringing very loudly, startling her. When she picks it up to see what it is, she finds a message from her mother. A neighbor had given her a doll as a gift, and she had placed it on her bedside table, asking Yubei to buy something in return. She remembers that the neighbor was a little girl named Xiao Ling and thinks that she really should buy a gift for her. Otherwise, the girl might get upset. Looking at the doll she received as a present, we see that it is a creepy hyena doll, but she doesn't seem to mind and decides to go to the mall. Back at home, Chan Yubei's parents are having a conversation, noticing that their daughter has been much happier in recent days. Not long after they moved, she had already made new friends, whereas before she used to be much quieter and more reserved. Her father is happy to hear that and says that moving to this city was truly the right decision. He places the doll on top of a table. Her mother says that, in the end, their daughter was special. He sighs, saying that everything has been so difficult, and in the background, we see the eerie doll. As the bedroom door closes, we catch one last glimpse of that cursed doll, looking more like a winter ventriloquist figure. And then finally, everything goes dark. I swear to you, at the exact moment I finished writing this, the power in my house went out completely. It is now 6:00 p.m., and we are at Asakawa Mall. Kan Yubei is looking at some things in the store displays and spots a cat that she finds very cute, but the rabbit beside it seems to be more popular. A sound starts playing from the speakers. It seems to be music, talking about how good it is to drink, and something about loving in a different way. This song feels a bit strange, and it seems to be tied to a new urban legend that is emerging. Someone says they heard from their grandmother that this place used to be an abandoned baby farm. This conversation makes Chan Yubei start trembling, her heart pounding, as if she were sensing something strange around her. Yubei wonders if she is just being too sensitive, but her heart is racing too fast. This is very unusual. She needs a place to check the prophecy. Someone exclaims that the urban legend must be real since they played that strange song over the speakers. The people around don't seem to care much. Meanwhile, Yubei rushes toward a secluded spot. Once she goes through a door, she stops and starts breathing more calmly. Then she takes a coin in her hands, tosses it into the air, and when it finally lands on the ground, something makes Yubei even more terrified and trembling. She begins to wonder what kind of cursed song that was, and where the hell she was. A voice asks if anything has been found there, and another voice responds that things have been quiet lately and hopes they stay that way. A couple is discussing how the mall was built on that site and how everything would be fine as long as the spirits remained under control. Yubai watches them from afar, wondering if they too are mediums like Shinji, but they seem far more dangerous. She stays silent. She clutches the coin in her hands, but just as she is about to put it away, a black hand grabs hers, calling her big sister. This terrifies Yubai, and when she turns to look at what it is, the sight leaves her horrified. A shadowy silhouette of a child tells her that it's too hot here and that they want to leave. The girl's eyes widen in shock, and she immediately jerks her hand away from the strange boy's reach and starts running. Yubai rushes toward the eerie couple, shouting for them to run as well, warning them that whatever was there was too dangerous. They needed to get to the safest place possible. The next moment, something appeared right in front of her. A grotesque face, belonging to something inexplicable, asked if she had seen its child around. If you look closely, it resembles Sedakuro from Dandadan, don't you think? It was a giant monster, its arms stretched over the couple's heads while its own head was twisted backward, with an unnaturally long neck. In the very next moment, the heads of the two mediums were severed from their bodies, right in front of the girl. Covered in blood and too terrified to react, she could only stare at the monstrosity that had just murdered two random people. The monster looked at her, grinning horrifically, while many others were within its reach. Yubai tried to convince herself not to be afraid at that moment, telling herself it was all just an illusion, that the images she had seen weren't real. So she turned to run away because that woman in the red dress was real, and she needed to get as far away from her as possible. Leaving her broken glasses behind, she started running toward the stairs, looking for the safest place possible inside that shopping mall. She found a women's restroom and entered, but she couldn't find what she was looking for. Sitting in a corner near the sinks, trembling, she muttered that she couldn't find it. Something or someone began knocking on the door. Long strands of hair started creeping in, and she heard a voice asking for help to turn off the faucet. The creature said it was scared and begged Yubai for help, but she couldn't see clearly without her lost glasses and asked who that thing was, pleading for it to wait, just for a moment. However, the monstrous strands of hair had already begun entering her ears. They soon invaded her skull completely as she kept repeating that she couldn't see clearly. The faucet continued to drip. Then, controlled by the enormous strands of hair, the girl walked toward the sink and turned off the faucet. The monster began laughing and thanked her for doing that, and through the mirror, we could see that Yubai had been completely possessed by the anomaly. She felt as if she were truly about to die, and then countless teeth began surrounding her head, ready to devour her. Shinji's eyes appeared, and the next moment, a red beam of light pierced through the restroom door. His energy beam narrowly missed Kan Yubei's head, and at that moment we could see how beautiful she truly was. Hopefully, she really will become the MC's wife. The darkness began to fade from her eyes, and the restroom door collapsed from the force of the impact. Shinji then called her by name. He asked if this was the danger she had mentioned in her message. Crying, she called out to the protagonist and screamed. Yubai asked what he was doing there and then ran toward him. But before she could reach him, he placed a finger on her forehead, stopping her from getting any closer. He pulled her glasses out from inside his uniform and using his spiritual power, repaired them. Is this the Harry Potter repair spell or what? Shinji handed the glasses back to the girl and told her not to lose them again. She thanked him for fixing them. He said it was fine, but that he had several questions to ask her, and she had to answer them truthfully. Looking to the side, someone greeted him. Two girls appeared, introducing themselves as members of the excavation team, and asked if he was the inspector. 6:15 p.m., inside Astakawa Mall. Someone shouted for people not to panic, saying that everything was just a movie, and asked everyone to delete any videos they had recorded. The people who had been filming and taking pictures began complaining, frustrated that they weren't allowed to keep their footage. Watching the commotion, Shinji asked if those people were part of the girls' team. They confirmed that yes, those people were their colleagues and part of the deception team. The MC then asked what they wanted from him. In truth, they just wanted to thank him for his help, since he was the only one with the ability to eliminate spirits. He then asked what they were holding. One of them explained that it was a spiritual pressure generator, a device that used spirit orbs to deal with monsters by applying spiritual pressure. But Shinji didn't need that. Shinji asked what that was, and she explained that it was something he had just obtained by defeating the monster. The MC reached into his uniform and pulled out a small black orb. He asked if this was the spirit orb and realized that the special department hadn't mentioned this item to him in their earlier conversation. He thought it wasn't that important and tried to hand it over to her, but the girl explained that she could keep it since it was a very useful source of power for inspectors. It was an item that could be used to increase spiritual power. Shinji becomes interested in this information but thinks that it doesn't seem like he can absorb it. Could it be some kind of restriction imposed by his notebook? Either way, he thinks it's not a big deal and wonders if he should let Yubai use it instead. The girl becomes embarrassed and confused as he looks at her with a smile. The boy then thanks them for their answers and says he will be leaving, and they reply that they won't bother him anymore. for now. He is leaving together with Yubai, who now has her hair down. The two girls from the other special department team start whispering, saying that he was the most handsome inspector they had ever seen. They also thought he was very kind to his girlfriend. Yubai hears this, which makes her blush and feel very embarrassed. I found that really cute, didn't you? Shinji didn't hear any of that. He was just thinking about how large the power gap between him and those girls was. According to the hints given by the notebook, he could already handle third-stage monsters, and even the stronger inspectors weren't as powerful as he was. This makes the MC wonder if he should already consider himself the strongest person in this world, while Yubei smiles, thrilled at being called his girlfriend. The girl was completely overwhelmed with emotion, already wondering if she should confess her feelings to him, or something like that. But she held back. It wasn't like he was there for her. When she asks why he was there, he explains that it was because of her warning message about danger, so he took the day off to investigate the area around his building. She gets excited to see that the topic of conversation has changed, and he starts explaining that he had seen some mediums patrolling nearby at that time. Shinji says that when he saw them get nervous and suddenly run away, he thought it might be a monster, so he decided to follow them. When he arrived at the location, he quickly understood that it was a vengeful spirit, and the mediums were shouting that it hadn't been suppressed. The place where the mall was built used to be a cemetery for babies from an old infirmary that once stood there. He didn't know exactly what had happened, but some experts said the land was excellent for construction, and someone eventually bought it to build the mall. After that, it became one of the first large-scale malls in Jiang City. The entire business started booming, and the sales results were truly impressive. The problem was that one day, people began mysteriously disappearing, and due to the lack of surveillance, it took time to locate them. Additionally, mall security guards frequently claimed to hear children crying after 6:00 p.m. in that place. One of the things they often reported seeing was the silhouette of a woman wearing a red dress, and this greatly affected the mall's business. The owner didn't want to give up, so he sought advice from a consultant. Only then did he discover the previous use of the land and that it was cursed. People who disappeared in that place ended up being killed by the vengeful spirits that were trapped there. The mother and child who were the first to disappear there also became vengeful spirits. After a while, they found a way to calm the monsters through a creepy song, and only because of that, there were no more disappearances. However, the vengeful spirits were never truly at peace, and the mall eventually became an urban legend. At that exact moment, the song starts playing again. Yubei says that she had heard this song before, but she explains that it had transformed into something even stranger, and immediately, she begins to hallucinate. Shinji had heard from the special department that strange things were happening there, but only today had this crisis begun, and they didn't know why. They even suspected that it could be the work of something much stronger, which makes Yubai wonder if her presence at the mall was the cause of this crisis. Regardless of the situation and the reasons behind this incident, he wanted to tell her that she was very weak and that if he hadn't been there, she would already be dead. To be fair, it wasn't entirely her fault. These monsters could distort people's judgment, leading her to go somewhere even more dangerous. Biting her lip, she simply nods, admitting that she was still very immature. Yubai starts crying, feeling weak, but she assures Shinji that she will do better next time. He then asks if she could buy something, and says he will accompany her. Immediately, her crying is replaced by genuine joy. He wanted to continue the conversation with her after she finished shopping. His face after saying that looks like a vampire. Do you guys agree? He almost seems like he's about to devour the girl after their date is over. Without noticing Shinji's expression, she gets excited and agrees to his proposal. Thus begins the couple's shopping trip episode, with Yubai getting excited about shopping with Shinji, while he remains as aloof as Sasuke. Eventually, they stop at a family restaurant to eat something. Kan Yubai asks him to extend his hand while she keeps her hand closed over his. She opens her hand, and the coin she uses for prophecies falls between them. It lands on the MC's hand. Shinji thinks it's just a coin and is confused, remembering that she had some kind of prophetic ability. She explains that this ability is called the Coin of Destiny, better than the Pick of Destiny, which was the Devil's Tooth in Tenacious D. This reminds the MC a goddess of fate in ancient Greek mythology. If such a goddess really exists, could she handle these monsters and spirits? Shinji asks how she uses this Coin of Destiny, and she explains that she simply flips it while asking a question, and it provides information based on which side it lands on. He asks what happens if the coin lands on the other side. The girl explains that he would lose his memories for a certain number of days. There was a 50% chance that the Coin of Destiny would land on the wrong side, and that's why she always carried her journal. The coin was very discreet, so much so that the protagonist hadn't even noticed it existed. Yubai explains that it is linked to her memories. Unless she perishes, it will always appear to be just a normal coin. Shinji questions whether she truly trusts him. Wasn't she afraid he might kill her to take this power? Nervous, Yubai quickly explains that he is a good person, and she knew this because the coin had told her that the safest place in the city was the Ghost Club. This makes the protagonist curious because even though it was considered the safest place in the city, all of its members were killed, including him, twice. Soon he comes to the realization that maybe he is the reason why the club is the safest place in the entire city. Shinji asks Yubei to ask the coin a question. She asks what he wants to know, and he says he wants to hear what it would say about his true identity. Even though she is confused, Yubei agrees to ask the question. Then she flips the coin. The coin begins to glow, emitting sparks from it. When it lands, Yubei extends her hand to catch it. Showing the side it landed on, Shinji asks if that was the opposite side. It didn't seem like she had any signs of amnesia. He wonders if she is lying to him. We know she isn't because she's too pretty to be a liar, but he doesn't know that. Yubei explains that the coin will not answer. He asks why. She says that the limit of memories that can be consumed has already been reached. The difficulty of a question depends on how many days worth of memories it requires. If the coin doesn't answer, it means the question requires more than 30 days of memory loss. That was the maximum limit of memory consumption for the coin. This reassures the MC. It's not like this power is absolute. He decides to ask another question. He tries something like, why was his club the safest place in the city? But that question doesn't work either. Yubei then decides to ask if there was something in the MC's house. Finally, the coin shows signs that it will respond. Yubei picks up the coin and says that it answered that there is something scary in his house. Shinji says he understands and tells her that dinner is on him. Standing up from the table, he simply tells her that she should leave the club. Yubei, startled, asks why, and he tells her that she is too weak to stay. Quickly grabbing his arm, she says that her coin also has a second ability. Seeing that he is interested, she starts explaining that she can change a person's short-term fate in exchange for years of memories. This information captures Shinji's attention. He asks her to explain clearly how this destiny-changing ability works. She says that he just needs to designate a person and imagine them in his mind. Then he can direct their fate toward either life or death. The MC thinks that even if she used that ability against him to kill him, all that would happen is that he would lose one day of his life. But how many times could she use it? He says that he has all the time he needs and asks if there is a way to change a long-term fate. She hesitates a little before speaking, but soon understands everything. Yubei exclaims that he had been tricking her this whole time. He simply says that her behavior was not that of someone with normal intelligence. She was too naive. She feels offended by this, but before she can think too much about it, he tells her that if she wants to stay in the club, she just needs to answer one last question with the coin. Yubei gets excited and agrees. The question is whether there is any monster in the Manhua apartment that could pose a life-threatening danger to him. Focusing, she tosses the coin into the air and catches it again. But when she opens her hand to see the answer, all she says is that the coin did not respond to that question. The girl then says that if he has any more questions, she could still help. But he replies that he doesn't need anything else. Shinji starts to think that she was already able to sense the terrible things in his house, like Little Eyes and Xiaoai, but this time he didn't get a satisfactory answer. This could mean that there were things that are much more powerful and dangerous than his two creations. The neighbor's monster must be quite strong. As he begins to leave, she calls out to him, but he says that's all for today and warns her not to talk about this ability to anyone, as it would be dangerous for her. The next moment, he extends his hand toward her, holding the spiritual orb. She looks a bit confused by the object. The MC explains that this orb could increase her spiritual power, so he was giving it to her. This was a form of compensation for forcing her to use the power of the coin. She thanks Shinji immensely for his kind gesture, but he simply tells her not to forget to come to the club tomorrow if she has nothing better to do. Thanking him again, she bows and asks if she could seek his advice in the future. Some people nearby recognize them as actors who had been filming earlier. Quickly, Yubei decides to go with him as he leaves, even though he tries to pretend he doesn't hear her. Shinji starts running, thinking that foolish people are scarier than the monsters he has faced so far. She yells desperately for him to wait. Later that night, upon arriving home, the protagonist is in the living room when someone knocks on his door again. He wonders who it could be at this hour. When Shinji opens the door, once again, his neighbor is there, asking to borrow a rice cooker because his had just burned out. Shinji looks frustrated to see him bothering him again. He couldn't sense anything wrong with him, but even so, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might be in danger. Thinking that he needed to be proactive, he considers refusing the request. Apologizing, the boy says that he is currently cooking rice as he has children at home and cannot lend the cooker at the moment. With a strange smile, the neighbor simply nods and says it's fine. He turns around to go back home, but Shinji doesn't fully close the door, keeping an eye on him to see what he would do next. The neighbor enters without making any other strange movements, but when we see the inside of his house, A dark, eerie shadow is standing inside. A strange voice starts moaning loudly, saying that it was hungry. Its face begins to distort, emitting a bizarre green odor. It was truly starving. Back at Shinji's house, he tells himself that if he said he was cooking for the children, then he really had to do it. He had to feed them. The real question at that moment was, where was the rice cooker? Looking around his kitchen, there seemed to be a pressure cooker there, but not a rice cooker. How was he supposed to eat? With some irritation, Shinji remembers the neighbor and says his name, Xiao-san. Once again, someone knocks on his door, calling out to him. The boy responds that he is coming. He opens the door again, his hand already prepared to strike if necessary. The eye of Little Eyes in his hand was open and alert. Xiao-Song was holding a pot in his hands, thanking the MC for lending it to him. The protagonist feels a chill and starts to stammer, realizing that it was really him. At this point, there was no doubt. The neighbor was a monster, that much was certain. Even if you refuse to lend him what he wants, he can force the loan and return the item later. Was this some kind of provocation? Or a warning? Shinji watches the man walk away and wonders if he was already under the monster's rules from the moment of the loan. How many people were already trapped? That man had been around for a while. Could he have been avoiding deaths by giving gifts before asking to borrow things? His ability could be proof that the protagonist had managed to improve his own abilities as well. Either way, now that he knew his neighbor was a monster, he needed to figure out as quickly as possible how to defeat him. As he jots things down in his notebook, Little Eyes catches his attention, asking him to look behind. Shinji asks what was wrong. When Shinji turns his head to see what's happening, he activates his spiritual ability to see through solid objects. The neighbor was standing in front of another door, Aunt Tien's. Quickly activating his ability with Little Eyes, he uses it on his own door, creating another version of the eye to observe the outside more clearly. Xiao-Song was asking the woman for a rice cooker, and she happily agreed, saying she would lend it to him. Shinji finds it strange. Aunt Tien was very vigilant and never spoke to anyone who wasn't an old resident of the building. This was still suspicious. She was oddly friendly with someone who had just moved in and was already lending him her things. The same thing had happened when he himself accepted the man's gift. The monster might be doing all of this unconsciously, manipulating people's thoughts and placing them under his rules. That was horrifying. Xiao-Song was coming back. Shinji kept watching him as he passed by, but then he suddenly stopped walking, making Shinji uneasy. The monster turned toward his door, and Shinji could feel the man's gaze on him. The MC felt an unusual sense of dread. He wondered if Xiao-Song had seen him as he continued walking down the hallway. The shadow Xiao-Song cast on the corridor wall was strangely elongated. Irritated, Shinji simply decides to sit on his couch, telling Little Eyes that he would have to take risks. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make progress. Little Eyes looks at him, and the boy asks if he wasn't going to help him this time. Then he jumps from the couch onto the coffee table. Xiao Yan picks up the TV remote and says, "Makabaka," turning it on. The TV displays a children's show where a character says, "Don't worry, everything's okay." Finding all of this hilarious, Shinji says that kids are truly impressive, which makes Little Eyes even more excited. Sometime later, the door to Shinji's apartment opens. He steps out into the hallway and starts walking. Seeing Xiao-Song walking ahead, he begins to observe him again, but this time more discreetly. A flash of lightning strikes outside a window. A storm seemed to be coming, and Xiao-Song enters a door into an extremely dark place. Upon seeing this, Shinji realizes this is the moment. He activates his ability along with Little Eyes in his hand. Rushing toward the door, his spiritual power is at its peak. Suddenly, everything around him turns green, and Shinji sees something that utterly terrifies him. Xiao-Song is watching him. His face is horrifically elongated, and he grins wickedly, speaking, "You're finally here." In his hands, he holds a severed head inside the rice cooker. Immediately, the monster's gaze paralyzes the MC, and his necklace begins shaking violently. Several branches start to sprout around him, ready to tighten and crush him like a boa constrictor. Without understanding what was happening, Shinji sees Xiao-Song's grotesque face beginning to cover his own, his eyes widening in horror. Trapped by the branches, he realizes it's too late. Blood begins dripping from his mouth as the monster mocks the entire situation. The MC feels as if he is being eaten alive, until he completely loses his life. 3 a.m. in Shinji's apartment, he opens his eyes as lightning flashes outside his window once again. He sits up quickly, panting, and looks at his hand. The eye of Little Eyes is closed. He had been killed before he even got the chance to use his ability. Was he still not strong enough? Maybe he had grown too confident. He needed to be more careful. Xiao-Song was like a ticking time bomb. His rules were undefined, combined with an extremely high hunting rate. Anyone could become his next meal. The MC still didn't know what to do. Little Eyes appears beside you, grabbing your arm and trembling. He seemed to be scared. Shinji asks if he was worried about him, but reassures him that he is fine. However, with tear-filled eyes of sorrow, he hugs the MC and says that Xiaoai has disappeared. Shinji looks confused but says that this couldn't have happened because he didn't feel anything strange, or could the special department have done something before he revived. Holding his necklace in his hands, the MC begins calling for Xiaoai using his notebook. He opens it to a specific page, and apparently, the description of her urban legend was still in the notebook. Could she have received a new task? Suddenly, Xiaoai's page begins to tear apart, leaving both Little Eyes and Shinji startled and anxious. Inexplicably, the page starts to catch fire and the message that she is dead appears. She had already warned that she might disappear, remember? Shinji grits his teeth and starts trembling with rage, saying that those guys from the special department were really something. One day earlier, in the special department's meeting room, the leaders were discussing the girl from the underworld and the plan to devour her. They reached a deadlock in the vote regarding this strategy until one of them slammed the table and shouted, asking why they had to kill her. If it was because those old men feared death, feeding that god monster with a monster of her level would also kill them. Another committee member states that the special department's final decision regarding the girl from Yomi was the plan to devour her. One of the elders clears his throat and says that since the department had already agreed on this decision, they would have no objections. The scene shifts to a mountainous region. A jeep speeds down the road, and in the back seat is the same leader who had made the final decision. He was reading the report with data on the god monster, including things to avoid when near it and its location. The car races through the night, alone on the road, until it reaches a gate where someone states that vehicles are not allowed beyond this point. They request identification and instruct the two passengers to step out for an inspection. The chief steps out after the driver opens his door. The moon was full that night, and a sharp, towering peak cut through it, with the facility standing in front of them. The name of the special department chief was Kang Ping. He shows his identification and is then granted entry. Still, he is escorted by several soldiers as he makes his way toward the monster. Various scanners are used on him: bone scanner, retina scanner, fingerprint scanner, gene scanner, until he is fully identified and authorized. Inside the God Mountain base, someone asks if he had brought the person. The response is yes. They only needed his command. Kang Ping looks at a giant dome and apologizes for taking everyone's time. It was time to begin. Everyone needed to be at a safe distance and carry an interference device. No one else could enter the surveillance room. Looking to the side, he seems to notice something, but the scene quickly changes. We now see the surveillance room, where a camera feed displays a person tied up and blindfolded, trembling alone inside the chamber. The chief of the special department calls the person by their designation, D-23977, and orders them to press the confirmation button on the phone. Kang Ping watches the scene and says that only this way would his daughter have the right to receive his ashes. Clenching his teeth in anger, the prisoner remains silent but obeys the command. A black rift appears before the man as he presses the send button on the infernal communication website. A strange sound starts resonating inside the room, and the prisoner's chair tips over, causing him to fall to the side. He seemed to be unconscious, and Kang Ping observes everything. Unfazed, Kang sees that Xiaoai has finally appeared and declares that she has lost. Turning around, we see that she seems to be trapped inside a glass dome while a black mist approaches her. Her color begins to shift to shades of gray as she is devoured by the other monster, and the mist takes the shape of enormous black claws, much larger than her. Her face starts to crack, and she realizes that she is finally being destroyed. I don't know about you, but I felt really sad about her defeat. The camera finally loses its feed from inside the chamber as he thinks about how the world's megaphone had declared that the power of God would grow once again. What meant he could deal with the girl from the underworld? How much more would they need to use this power to handle the monsters? He leaves the room. Kang Ping heads to the base's exit, lost in thoughts about that monster's growing power, knowing that the day it completes its evolution will mark the end of the world. The notebook explains the events that led to Xiaoai's defeat, but Shinji becomes confused, trying to understand what method they used to defeat her. He says it was no problem that she had died, nor did it even matter how they had defeated the girl. He knew that he could always choose to revive her. The notebook asks if he wants to spend legend points to resurrect the girl, and Shinji confirms. Completing the request, he asks that her area of effect be expanded to cover the entire world. Xiaoai was returning, more powerful than ever. Now she wore a dress instead of her schoolgirl uniform, and she becomes so beautiful that even Little Eyes blushed upon seeing her. Evolved, she could now even drag monsters to hell. Upon hearing the MC calling her name, she introduces herself. Shinji smiles and tells her to show those bastards a surprise. Several screens worldwide start displaying messages announcing that the Hell Communication website had reopened for the entire world. In many cities, people began seeing messages and discussing this urban legend. It was rapidly spreading. Her final message read, come to hell with me. All people had to do was pluck a petal and leave their grudges with her. People were shocked. The legend was true, and many started making contracts with her, wishing death and hell upon those they hated. The notebook congratulates the protagonist, informing him that his legend points had reached 1 million. He begins levitating from so much power. 10 minutes after the underworld girl's rebirth, the jeep carrying Kang Ping was returning to the city. A warning sound starts emitting, and the jeep abruptly brakes as the alert announces that the communication site had returned and the data was abnormal. A new action by the girl from the underworld had been detected, and the message repeats several times. Looking up at the red sky, Kang Ping, shocked, asks if she had revived after being devoured by the god, then clenches his teeth. Reaching for his communicator, he issues a level 1 alert and calls for an immediate meeting with the circle of intellectuals. 30 minutes after her rebirth, now in the meeting room, those seated are shocked to discover that their plan had failed and had many questions. Kang Ping informs them that the special department's monitors were investigating the issue at that very moment, and he would inform everyone as soon as he knew something. From that moment on, their plan would be to listen to Mr. Tiny and use an item that forces people to answer questions against the girl from the underworld. Another intellectual asks them to wait a moment and questions whether they considered the possibility that she had begun cooperating with other monsters. This possibility leaves them extremely shocked and frightened. The old man continues by saying that since things had already reached this point, he had a suggestion. They should once again use the god's power to kill the girl from the underworld and expand its area of effect again, just to relieve the pressure they're under. Kang Ping warns Mr. Chang to choose his words carefully. The old man stands up, saying he knows what Kang intends to do, but he's getting old and wants to express himself a little. False matters weren't what they were considering. Their objective was simply to kill the monsters. Someone says that this was correct. If the world had to handle the monsters, they'd have fewer problems. But regarding the alliance with monsters that Mr. Chang mentioned, if that was true, they would need to find them, or they wouldn't be able to deal with them. Kang Ping replies that the headphones would serve this purpose, so they needn't worry. Xiang says Kang believes they're being selfish, but had he considered that she might subdue the god? Merely considering this possibility placed humanity in unimaginable danger. Initially, Kang Ping is left speechless. Soon afterward, he states that all monsters were humanity's enemies, and they needed to ensure they could defeat them without collapsing humanity itself. Mr. Chiang observes Kang Ping. Ultimately, he decides to tell Kang to reflect on this himself, turning his back to him. Kang Ping says he knew everyone there was important to society. Politicians, doctors, lawyers, among others, all had their representatives. He just shouldn't forget that none of those men there could deal with those monsters. This statement seems to have affected Xiang, as he becomes shocked while Ping mentions they were under the protection of the special department. They only listened to the opinion of those intellectuals because of the sense of justice it represented within that circle. Xiang remains silent, and Kang Ping issues an ultimatum, saying they could leave the circle if they weren't happy. Xiang becomes furious and starts trembling with rage at these words. 10 minutes after this entire situation, Hanyan was yawning. Someone called Old Neo had phoned him while he was sleeping. He was too tired. Upon entering a room, the people at a table greeted him. His boss informs him that he had a mission. Immediately, the boy refuses the mission. Then his boss explains that he needed someone with excellent escape skills, so he had to accept the mission, as they were short-staffed. Hanyan asks what the mission was, but before that, he would need some people to help and use resentment as a weapon. Hanyan already understands the situation and immediately becomes nervous, realizing he might have to deal with the Yomi girl again. This leaves him paralyzed with fear for a moment, stuck in his chair, thinking about what he should do on this mission. Back at the MC's house, Xiaoai was very tired. Little Eyes was on her lap, seemingly playing some little game. They're very cute, like siblings. Shinji becomes curious about this information. He didn't know that monsters could get tired, and Xiaoai was feeling like an ordinary worker. The MC apologizes, but returning to the subject of interest, he asks her if now she might have enough power to defeat Xiao Song together with Little Eyes. Unfortunately, she still couldn't understand his rules. Shinji thinks that despite this, it was great that she'd revived. At least she was stronger now. This way, she could help him with his investigation. Taking the pendant in his hands, he begins to concentrate. Scanning the building, he tries to find Xiao Song and realizes that he once again went upstairs to borrow something. Shinji sees two men arguing because one of them had lent something to Xiao Song. The one complaining was a Manhua artist who dislikes Song. The one who lent the item was a kind-hearted guy named Shido. Shinji carefully observes the two men's situation, analyzing what might happen to them. The MC thinks the writer might have avoided his own death, but for Shido, things wouldn't be so simple. He would share the same fate as the others. The doorbell rings, immediately catching the MC's attention. A food delivery person was at Xiao Song's door, informing that his order was ready. The protagonist thinks this would go terribly wrong, but the delivery person sees the house door open and finds this strange. The elevator was descending to the MC's apartment floor, and Song was inside, saying he'd succeeded. Meanwhile, the delivery person was observing the interior of the house. The elevator arrives at the 18th floor. Leaving his home, Shinji informs the delivery person that he's on the wrong floor. The person he's looking for was upstairs. The delivery person looks at him a bit confused. He checks the paper with the delivery information and realizes he was indeed at the wrong place. He thanks the protagonist, and Shinji tells him to get out of there as quickly as possible, since the homeowner was mentally ill. The next instant, he looks to the side and sees Xiao Song already beside the delivery person, who hadn't yet noticed the monster's presence. Looking back, the delivery person gets startled. With a dangerous smile, Shinji greets Song, who smiles tiredly and asks if he was interrupting anything. The delivery person panics, but Shinji steps forward and tells him to get out as soon as possible. Approaching Song, Shinji asks to enter his house to have a look, to which he replies that he could indeed enter. Opening the already slightly open door, Xiao Song invites the MC inside his home, but upon entering the apartment, he finds it strange, as he thought he was going to perish. He considers that perhaps he remained alive because he was allowed to enter the house for some purpose. Looking inside, he sees several empty bags that look quite familiar to him. The boy calls out for Xiao Song, who responds while already drooling, as if about to attack. Shinji says he needed a bag to wrap a gift and asks to take one of the bags he had at home. Scratching his head, Xiao Song asks if he really needed a bag. As Shinji replies yes and moves his hand closer to one of them, he asks if he can take it. The way Xiao Song observes this movement makes the protagonist realize some of his rules. If he doesn't allow the MC to do something, anything there could cause him to lose his life registration. Pulling his hand back from the bag, Shinji smiles and asks if it wasn't allowed. He then says it's fine, as he won't do anything without Xiao Song's permission. Quickly, Xiao Song corrects himself, saying it was no problem. He could take one of the bags to use, and hands one directly to Shinji. When the bag lands in the MC's hand, he realizes there's something inside and wonders if it was an undelivered gift. Xiao Song mentions that he has to return Mr. Shio's pan. Shinji wonders if Xiao Song was indirectly asking him to leave the house and thinks it's better to do what he wants. Thanking him for the bag, the MC is preparing to leave Xiao Song's house, but Xiao Song tells the boy to wait. Approaching the protagonist, the monster asks if he's not going to try it, mentioning there were very good snacks inside. He takes one of the snacks from the protagonist's bag, still saying they're delicious, and puts it in his mouth. Xiao Song bites into the snack, saying it's jelly-filled and suggests the protagonist should taste it. Nervously, the boy considers whether he should follow that advice, thinking it might be another of Xiao Song's rules and worrying if he triggered something in the monster. If accepting or rejecting Xiao Song's requests could lead to the same outcome, then perhaps he could discover another rule by picking up the snack. As Shinji takes a bite, he immediately begins to gag. That wasn't a savory biscuit. The MC immediately passes out and vomits simultaneously, while Xiao Song watches him with a macabre smile. Collapsed on the ground in his own puddle of vomit, the boy finally realizes it was a human finger. Already back at the special department, Ping asks Aokiji if she has anything else to say, but she only replies that Hongyin remains their best option. Hongyin was terrified of dealing with her, but he had no choice. Aokiji also mentions that Shinji was working with them. She says he's very strong, and his special ability is resurrection. This catches Ping's attention, and he asks her to say more about him. She replies he's just a student. At that moment, the notebook informs Shinji that he had entered the evil neighbor's rules. He had already identified most of them, but some remained unknown. Shinji was already back at his apartment, realizing he'd probably use resurrection again. Looking at his notebook, he begins to think that it might be necessary for Xiao Song to take action for him to discover the remaining unknown rules. Looking to the side, he sees Xiao Ai and Xiao Yan eating the snacks he received from the neighbor, and it frightens him. The girl says the snack was really tasty. She tries offering one to the protagonist, but he immediately pulls back, already feeling sick from remembering what he'd eaten previously. Xiao Ai insists it's just an ordinary biscuit. Little Eyes attempts to eat but has no mouth, so he pushes the snack directly into his eye. How does he speak if he has no mouth? Shinji feels more relieved after hearing Xiao Ai's words, but he's still worried about the neighbor's threat level. Testing the full extent of Xiao Song's rules was polluting his spiritual power, but that didn't matter. Regardless of methods, Xiao Song needed to be eliminated as soon as possible. Changing the subject, Shinji asks the girl if she can remember how she was eliminated by the special department, but this question. Xiao then begins reliving previous traumas and says she can't answer that. Little Eyes hugs her, concerned, while she says all she can remember is seeing something, and the next moment losing consciousness. She says she'll try to remember again, but he says it's alright if she can't. Maybe this was the notebook's way of protecting her. Reflecting on this, the MC concludes that the special department has power that's dangerous to him. On the surface, they share the same objectives, but what if they discover he can create monsters? Perhaps using the special department's resources would be a good idea. They might have information about Xiao Song there, but he needed to find it before they did. This statement from the protagonist seems to confuse Xiao Ai, who looks beautiful even when she doesn't understand anything. He explains that if the department reaches the neighbor before he does, they might use it against her, which wouldn't be good for his plans. It was already daylight in Jiang City, and Hong Yin had come to pick up the MC by car. He seemed to have already forgotten Shinji's provocations from the past and was cheerful. Hong Yin says he's on vacation, so he was enjoying himself, and comments that if he were from the special department, he could give the underworld girl's mission to him. Shinji immediately asks about the girl, as if he didn't know who she was, which confuses Hong Yin. He starts explaining that she was a disaster-level monster. Shinji says he knew her, but he thought they'd already dealt with her. The red-haired boy starts crying, saying he'd already lost to her once, but Shinji genuinely doesn't care about him, even though Hong Yin is complaining. He says she had been defeated and revived even stronger, and starts recalling the trauma of having gone through her hell, already anticipating going through it again. Shinji asks if he can communicate with monsters, but his mind is focused on the department's methods for destroying monsters. Now that they're planning to deal with her again, he wonders if they've evolved their methods to handle her, given that she's also become more powerful. Approaching the protagonist with a smug smile, Hong Yin asks Shinji if he knew that the underworld girl was sentient, catching him by surprise. This attitude makes the redhead think Shinji was just a weak nerd, even though previously he had been extremely cautious around him. Hong Yin comments that he was forced to learn how to make people hate him intensely, allowing them to summon the girl and force her to answer their questions. Their initial guess is that she might have allies in her quest to drag people into hell. Shinji hums curiously, and Hong Yin adds that this wasn't necessarily true, just a guess. The MC decides not to ask too much to avoid raising suspicion, but wonders how far Xiao Ai would be forced to respond. Arriving at the department, Shinji considers if he could ask them to inquire whether she had allies after summoning her, but wonders if they'd be able to discover who they were. Or perhaps they had a way to force her to reveal her new rules. She wasn't a monster who killed indiscriminately. Even so, he thinks they couldn't blame him for taking necessary precautions if needed. Here we see the birth of a new Kira. The way of thinking is identical. They finally arrive at the department's garage. Hong Yin skids the car slightly just to show off. Standing in front of the huge building, he asks the protagonist if it was his first time there and if he didn't find the building impressive. Shinji just agrees. The two reach the front of the building, and the boy becomes confused, asking why it was so quiet there, to which the redhead replies that nobody liked going there. Going to that building meant there was a mission to complete. Looking inside, Shinji notices a strange device that appears to be scanning the boy like a camera. He asks what it was, and it was the Eye of Truth, which could scan anyone entering the special department for the first time and detect various other things. Curious, the MC asks if it could scan for monsters, but Hong Yin jokes that if that were the case, it would already have been used for that purpose. Irritated, the boy asks why they use that device to scan people, but Hong Yin says it was time to start working. A microphone emitting a strange purple aura was placed in front of them, and the redhead tells the MC to hold the microphone and read the words, "I will never betray humanity." He also warns that using that device would consume 1 day of his life, and he only had 86 days remaining, which to him seemed insane, as it was one less day of life. The redhead approaches and asks if he's afraid to die, but Shinji simply says he's curious to know what it was. Hong Yin explains it was a device used to test his mind and subconscious, and he would have to use it every 6 months. Shinji pretends to be unconcerned about it, asking if he would gain privileges from it. After all, it was 1 day of his life being spent. Shinji teases Hong Yin, who asks what privileges he wanted. The MC says they must have some place with information on the monsters, and asks if he could see it, but Hong Yin only asks what exactly he wants to know. He wanted information, but the redhead says nobody besides the department chief and the intellectual circle could know about it. The two argue because of this. Shinji gives in, saying he was just a rookie who wanted to know more, and Hong Yin, also relenting, says he'll see what he can do for him. Still distrustful, the redhead silently thinks he'll deal with Shinji before he tries anything against the department, and Shinji finally picks up the microphone. Confidently, he then recites the mantra, "I will never betray humanity." Immediately, the microphone begins glowing brighter, startling and infuriating Hong Yin. 2 red orbs start glowing along with the microphone, apparently reacting to the little eyes in his hands and the MC's pendant. Hongyin was already preparing to attack the MC when finally the device announces that Shinji has passed the test. The redhead says he'd gotten scared, thinking the protagonist had been lying, but claims the equipment was old and needed checking. Hongyin grows irritated but changes the subject when the device displays his team's data. He finds the name Phantom Team interesting and remembers he's still a student. Yet that boy already dealt with the supernatural, and Hongyin advises against his team staying in such crowded places. Shinji asks why. The redhead responds that the more people gathered, the more monsters could appear. Scientists had concluded the monsters were connected to humanity. This helps the boy better understand the state of that world. The game, for example, used the internet to indiscriminately impose death. Xiao Song used the identity of a neighbor to forcibly borrow things from people and then erase them from life. Xiao Ai fed off resentment and bitterness within interpersonal relationships. Finally, Little Ai's assassination abilities were triggered by dysfunctional family relationships. All of this was tied to humans. Apparently, in that world, monsters strangely appeared with the intent to eradicate all of humanity. Shinji then wonders what would happen if they managed to isolate the monsters from humans. He wanted to test this theory first on Xiao Song. A hand reaches out. It's Hongyin pulling him back to reality, asking again if he was afraid of something and reassuring him that he was safe at home. Shinji hears this but thinks his neighbor was still a monster nonetheless. Saying goodbye, Shinji turns to leave, mentioning he needs to go quickly. Surprised, the redhead asks if he won't stay to study longer. He knew he wouldn't gain access to the most interesting information, but at least he was leaving with a few experimental ideas. In an alleyway in the middle of the city, Chan Yubei finds Shinji. He asks what she's doing there, and she replies that she hadn't seen him at school for days and was worried. Yubei even asks if he needs help with anything, but he says it's unnecessary. She becomes curious, but he doesn't want her involved with monsters beyond her capacity. The girl insists she can still be helpful and gets excited about being near him. Shinji watches her but passes by, saying she would only get in the way. He commands her not to follow him. If she tried to get involved again, she would be expelled from the Ghost Club. She obeys his command but remains confused by his behavior. Back at his apartment building, Shinji stands before Xiao Song's door, but before taking any action, he begins recapping what he knows about him. Apparently, Xiao Song killed people in random locations. Once you became his neighbor, whether you accepted his gifts or not, you became his target. His requests gradually became more personal until he asked to borrow your heart, but you had a chance to balance out the borrowing. Thinking about this, he recalls the Manhwa writer who didn't want to lend something to him and wonders what that could trigger. Could people who rejected his gifts be saved? He needed to warn these people before Xiao Song did something to them. Immediately, he abandons this plan, knowing Xiao Song was a ticking time bomb. Shinji had to catch him right there. Activating Little Ai's power in his hands, he sends multiple hands towards Xiao Song's door to lock him in. At first he thinks it worked, but as Little Ai's ability begins to fade, the notebook alerts him that he can't do that. A new rule states that human houses couldn't trap monsters. This shocks and alarms the protagonist because this rule was terrible. A sort of black hole emitting a green glow starts absorbing Little Ai's ability right in front of the protagonist. He would have to risk his life. A voice comes from the door, asking why he's standing outside the door to his house. Shinji is being dragged into that dark place while the monster calls his name. A gigantic mouth opens before him, ready to devour him right there. The monster begins speaking, asking to borrow something. The boy shouts that he'll lend his hand, charging a powerful strike, and lands a punch on the creature in front of him. In the next instant, it's already behind him, finishing its sentence by saying it wants to borrow his heart. Caught by surprise, the protagonist is pierced by Xiao Song's claws. Frustrated, Shinji thinks that if he were a monster himself, he'd be able to deal with this thing. The system notifies him that Xiao Song has entered killing mode. Stepping out of his door, he starts going to the houses of other residents, asking to borrow their hearts. He approaches a woman who is working on her computer. She sees him and asks who he was and what he was doing. But in the very next moment, the monster erases her from existence. This process repeats throughout the building. He's massacring all residents until no one remains alive. The number of people who would return was at 0, until shortly afterward the number changes to 1. Xiao Song seems to have noticed this and turns his head. Shinji wakes up again, clutching his pendant. He still hadn't realized that Song had noticed his return from death. With a nervous smile, a new rule appears for him. He could counterbalance the forced loan by returning his initial gift. This was his main rule. Shinji was exhausted. Entering his home, all he thinks about is how good it was to have a backup plan and not throw away his gift. As he reaches the shelf where things were, he hears a sound that terrifies him. Appearing at the door, Xiao Song notices Little Eyes' presence, who asks who he was. The monster was going to talk to Little Eyes to borrow things. Shinji notices this and runs toward him, screaming for Little Eyes to return to his hand. The little Cyclops is startled by this. The MC pulls him back into the notebook and feels relieved since the notebook warned him Xiao Song's curse wasn't limited to humans. Once again, Xiao Song asks to borrow the protagonist's heart, transforming himself, and Shinji smells a strong scent of blood coming from him. He notices there were bloodstains on his clothes. Something was wrong. The MC still didn't know that after his previous loop, Xiao Song had eliminated everyone in the building. Lifting the bag containing Song's gift, the MC hands it to him, who looks at it a bit confused. Appearing disappointed, Xiao Song calms down and takes the bag in his hands, thanking the protagonist while leaving through the door. Shinji considers following him to see what had happened. He runs toward the door to check if anything had occurred while he was in limbo, returning to life. Using his abilities, he realizes there was no one else alive in the building besides the two of them. In disbelief, Shinji wonders how this was possible. Could there still be someone alive in the building? One of the fruits falls on the floor, and Xiao Song bends down to pick it up, while numerous bodies lay scattered across the hallway before him. Saying goodbye to the MC, the monster simply goes back inside his home. All the residents' hearts had been taken by Xiao Song. The souls of the tenants begin to torment the boy, demanding their lives back, believing he was an accomplice to the monster. He tells the souls to calm down, but they don't listen. In a burst of anger caused by their constant lamenting, he yells at them to shut up, using one of his powers to cut through them. Song had already taken everyone's hearts except his own because he used his backup plan to avoid death. But why hadn't Song left? Why were there still 3 rules locked and unreadable for the protagonist? Frustrated, he doesn't notice Xiao Song approaching once more, this time asking if he could borrow his soul. Immediately, the protagonist feels as if he's being sucked into a black hole again, and he begins to scream. Shinji wakes up again in his house. He'd once again been killed by the monster, and now wonders if borrowing the heart was related to borrowing the soul. He thinks this should count as his escape, but once again hears Xiao Song's voice calling his name and entering through the door of his house. Shinji hides behind the sofa. He didn't even have time to think of a new plan with the monster knowing he'd returned. The boy then realizes he'd entered an infinite loop. His cell phone falls to the floor as he tries to call Aokiji. His lifespan was rapidly diminishing, and he desperately reaches for the phone. Aokiji answers, and he identifies himself as Shinji Yuan. She was in her apartment, taking a bath, and asks what had happened, reminding him to use a pseudonym next time. Shinji then explains he encountered a monster using the rules of the evil neighbor and is trapped in an infinite loop. He urgently needs her help with information. Aokiji asks if he meant the disaster-level monster evil neighbor and wants to know how he got there. Getting out of the bathtub, she says the monster had already been restrained by the special department not long ago and tells Shinji to wait while she retrieves information. Contacting the department via telepathy, she requests data on the monster through the mental data machine. Aokiji begins explaining that the way to avoid death from this monster was to return its gift. Shinji responds that he's already returned the welcome gift. The door to his house opens once again. Xiao Song was already there, telling Shinji he's now asking for his soul. With a grotesque face, Song appears behind Shinji, repeating his demand for Shinji's soul. Blood splatters everywhere as Kenji listens, shocked by what's happening. She quickly contacts the special department again, reporting an urgent situation. The protagonist's lifespan continued to diminish. Now he only had 81 days left. He asks if Aokiji was still there, and she confirms she is. She asks if he's alright, and he replies that he's still alive. Kenji tells him to listen carefully. He had probably encountered a monster with corrected rules. Shinji doesn't understand that term, and she explains every monster is an embodiment of a set of rules, and humans survive due to flaws in those rules. To correct these flaws, monsters use humans to grow stronger, and now that the evil neighbor changed its rules, it can force people's deaths. Aokiji believes it has evolved to the tyrant level. The last time, they used a special item to control the evil neighbor. This item created 100 clones of an investigator to trap it inside a building, constantly providing new copies of people for it to feed on. Shinji asks if the item was capable of copying the soul of the person used, allowing it to repeatedly kill them. Aokiji confirms it could, asking what he intended to do, but Shinji interrupts, asking if the copy person dies in reality. She replies no, and before she can ask further questions, Shinji says he wants to borrow that item. After taking a fragment of his soul, the monster would assume there are no more complete people in the building and would finally leave. Only then could he finally break free of the rules and avoid dying. Aokiji says she understood his intentions and would request the item immediately. The stamp would soon be delivered to his home. She was amazed at his calmness, even in a situation as desperate as a nearly endless death cycle. In her opinion, that boy truly was impressive. The item quickly arrives at the protagonist's house via drone. Shinji finds the delivery efficiency quite impressive. Aokiji comments that quick delivery was a trademark of the special department. They end the call as she wishes him luck. Shinji picks up the briefcase and opens it to inspect its contents. Inside, there was a small circle with a type of blue flame. Picking it up, he notices it truly resembles some sort of stamp. The MC then places the item against his chest, causing the blue flame to spin rapidly as if forming a vortex. Immediately, his soul splits into 100 copies along with himself. Copies of Shinji appear before him, and as he reviews Xiao Song's rules, he finally sees them clearly. The last rule states that now that Xiao Song had acknowledged him as the final neighbor and Shinji had divided his soul, he would be trapped there forever until the monster got what it wanted. Shinji also received Xiao Song's true name, but quickly realizes it's useless. Even if the monster took the heart from one copy, the soul would remain incomplete. As long as other fragments of his soul were alive in other bodies, Xiao Song couldn't fully take the complete soul. It would try to capture all fragments as one. He had no idea how powerful the monster he was facing truly was until now. The notebook system asked if he wanted to commit suicide and reset everything. Another day of his life had been wasted on this, but now he seemed to know exactly what to do. There were 80 days left. Shinji called King Ji again, and she asked if he had failed once more. He confirmed that yes, he had failed again, but now he had a new idea. He asked if the special department had ever used monsters to deal with other monsters. King Ji momentarily froze, realizing he'd come up with the same idea the department always had, using a god against other monsters to destroy them. She was still incredulous that he could conceive such an idea, yet she underestimated him, thinking he was just a student. It couldn't be possible that he was the one who revived Xiao Ai. Noticing Aokiji's silence, he asked if he'd said something he wasn't supposed to know, but she diverted the topic by asking what his plan was. He said he wanted to summon the girl from the underworld and send the monster straight to hell, believing this was the best solution. Xiao Ai immediately answered Shinji's call, but he asked her to remain silent while Aokiji protested, insisting that Shinji would perish along with the monster if he went through with this plan. She explained the girl's rules as if Shinji wasn't already familiar with them, recommending he abandon that plan because it would send him to hell as well. Shinji then asked if she had a better plan for him, and she honestly replied that there was nothing fundamentally wrong with his logic. Aokiji decided to reveal that the special department had previously used a rule-bound item to create an area and trap a monster inside it. The item was called the Buddhist statue. A previous department had already used it to contain a tyrannical-level monster called Girl I Can See, but it required immense mental power. The MC said that, as far as he knew, this item was so rare that their total number worldwide could be counted on one hand, and its use was strictly limited. Nevertheless, he asked if she could obtain one for him, and Aokiji admitted that he was right. Shinji started acting, saying that if he could survive even one more day, he'd do it. After all, there was no difference between living here or in hell forever. Xiao Ai was even impressed by his acting skills, but Aokiji believed him and admired his courage in doing what was necessary. He was someone who couldn't be underestimated. After hanging up the phone, he told Xiao Ai it was time to start their work. She agreed. Then he opened the notebook, saying he wanted to correct the rules of the girl from the underworld and upgrade her abilities. The notebook asked if he was sure about spending 900,000 points to achieve this, and he confirmed. Now anyone who entered there would never escape from hell again. With this, the boy believed he could finally defeat that terrible monster. The doorbell at his house rang. The door opened immediately, with Xiao Song already calling out the protagonist's name. Xiao Ai handed the flower to the boy so he could pluck the petals. Holding the flower, Shinji uttered the monster's true name, declaring it was time to pay for his sins. Finally, he vanished from reality and found himself aboard Xiao Ai's boat. Xiao Song was lying down and opened his eyes. Getting up, he greeted the girl. Holding a bag, he introduced himself as the new neighbor, saying he brought some gifts for her. Before he could finish speaking, the dark soul snatched the bag from his hands and started advancing on him, intending to strangle him. Looking back, Xiao Ai commented that they were already giving him a very warm welcome. She told him not to worry about anything, as he would have plenty of neighbors in hell. Her master had arranged all of this specifically for him. The next morning finally arrived, and on the protagonist's chest was Xiao Ai's flower, resembling a tattoo. Looking at it in the mirror, he thought he should leave the mark there for a while, but he looked completely exhausted. Little Eyes called out to the MC, and Shouai explained that the evil neighbor was now in hell. She complained that he was constantly dumping trash for the souls in her territory. Little Eyes also seemed frustrated by this. Shinji just asked her not to bring those things out, as they were all disgusting. He was still traumatized by the finger he'd eaten. She apologized, but he reassured her that it was okay and began stroking her head approvingly for what she'd done. This slightly impressed her. The MC said she was the ruler of hell, and he couldn't just do whatever he wanted in there. Little Eyes became jealous of the affection Shouai was receiving. He had no idea how powerful the monster he was facing truly was until now. The phone rings. It was a message from King Ji saying he needed to see a psychologist, and that it could be either at his home or at the department. Shinji wonders why on earth someone would go to that horrible building without a good reason, but bringing someone to his home could be dangerous too, right? Looking out the window, he sees some people from the special department as well as from real estate agencies. Shouai explains that they cleared out the entire building yesterday. She also says that all those people will lose their jobs after signing the confidentiality agreement with the special department. 30 minutes after that, the psychologist arrives at the protagonist's home. Her name was Sherry, and she looks a little like John Yubai, don't you think? She asks if she knocked on the wrong door. Shinji says she could call him Ghost, his pseudonym as an independent investigator. She says they are neighbors now. The word neighbors triggers something in the boy, causing him to recall the entire massacre from yesterday, and he asks if people could still live there. She replies yes, and invites him to see the place. The special department had cleaned up the entire area, but he was somewhat concerned about that woman's presence. Could she be a spy for them? Feigning indifference, he tells her to hurry so she can finish her work, but she replies that's not how things work. The special department considered him a special person, and that was why they sent her to help him, not to spy on what he was doing. She had heard about yesterday's events, so she grabs his arm, saying he could relax and leave everything to her. This movement puts him on alert, and she looks at him, saying he could just pretend she was his new friend. In her position, I'd accept that friendship too. This seems to affect him as well, making him think she might be there to lower his guard and then spy on him. He replies he never said he wouldn't cooperate, but wanted things to be a bit more straightforward between them. She agrees with his point and moves toward the coffee table, saying she wants to talk about some other things first. Kneeling in front of the sofa, she begins to take off her coat and asks him to lie down first, catching him completely off guard. She tells him to relax, raise his hands, and direct his palms toward the ceiling, and he obeys. Holding his hand, she instructs him to breathe and begins to blow onto his palms. Just seeing this makes my heart race. I'd want it too, wouldn't you? He remains silent but thinks this feels much more like a scam than real psychological treatment. Look at that ridiculous pose of his. It made me laugh a lot. Taking out a small box, she pulls out a crystal and asks him to hold it in his hands. Shinji asks what it is. Sherry responds that it's a heart crystal, used to check a person's emotional stability. It glows red, putting her on alert. He asks what that means, and she explains that the crystal only had two meanings. One was severe depression, the other was called corruption, where someone's emotions become polluted and their mind starts to lose rationality. Removing a necklace from around her neck, she says she wants to try something, and begins swinging the watch in front of the boy's eyes. Exasperated, Shinji exclaims that he doesn't need hypnotherapy, grabbing her arm and taking the watch from her hands. When he does this, he realizes that the person who had actually been hypnotized was the woman herself, completely asleep in a very suggestive position. Without hesitation, the protagonist pushes her aside, irritated at himself for letting his guard down for even an instant, but curious about how she'd ended up in such a situation. Could she be related to Django from One Piece, that useless pirate who constantly put himself to sleep with his own hypnotic abilities? Shinji starts bringing the watch closer to the girl's face, until something strange happens with the object. The scene changes with her opening her eyes, but not in reality. Her pupils are now two clocks, and she appears to be underwater. Realizing she can't breathe, she wonders if this is Mr. Ghost's mental world. The place looks like a gigantic city. Something resembling a black hole appears before her. She watches it and thinks that this is what happens when humans and monsters go to war. This was survival of the fittest. Then, a voice shouts that all stupid and greedy humans will be eliminated. Observing something exterminating humanity in that vision, the girl begins to wonder if Mr. Ghost has already started to hate humanity. That was too dangerous to simply ignore. Mr. Ghost was already a huge threat to society, and she needed to find his subconscious as quickly as possible. In the next instant, something seemed to pull her down, making her fall into a very deep pit. An inexplicable monstrosity watched the girl and said she seemed very delicious. I agree. What about you guys? Do you agree with me as well? Sherry stood before a giant eye. I believe it was little eyes fused with the MC, and wondered what exactly that was. Could it be a monster? Suddenly, countless hands reached for her, cutting and severely injuring her in several places. She began to react, pulling something from her pocket and putting a ring on her finger. It had the power to weaken monsters. Performing Goku's Kamehameha pose, she shouted that all phenomena were like dreams, illusions, bubbles, and shadows, and that was exactly how she perceived them. The ring began to vibrate, emitting a massive light that destroyed the entire mental city. Then she appeared alone, in a seemingly desolate place, beginning to feel cold, but this was likely Shinji's subconscious. This was an uncharted area within a person's mental activity, and also the most inaccessible part for inspectors. To accomplish this within the MC's mind would likely present even greater challenges. Sherry started watching someone approaching by boat. The person in question was none other than Xiaowai, who asked if she was there to see her master. Sherry immediately recognized the face of the girl from the underworld, making her wonder if she would eventually become one of the MC's subordinates in the future. Little did she know that the girl already belonged to him. Sherry confirmed that yes, she wanted to seek Xiaowai's master. Xiaowai asked why she was there, but before Sherry could explain her intentions, the girl warned her to be honest. If she didn't tell the truth, she would remain there forever. Xiaowai was now standing right in front of Sherry, giving her a threatening look while saying this. Sherry replied, saying she hoped Mr. Ghost wouldn't become a monster, holding the hands of the girl from the underworld as she spoke. Xiaowai asked if she realized she was discussing this matter with a monster. Sherry replied that was exactly her point. Sherry believed the girl from the underworld standing there was merely one of MC's defense mechanisms. In her opinion, common psychological treatments wouldn't work at all. Sherry stated she couldn't allow the MC to become a monster, but she also thought it wouldn't actually happen. She saw him as a good person. Xiaowai appeared to calm down slightly, but warned Sherry that, unfortunately, she probably wouldn't get out alive. Still, since Xiaowai didn't see her as an enemy of her master, she handed her something, hoping it would help. In the next moment, a voice called out to the girl from the underworld, screaming that she betrayed him, and immediately began attacking Xiaowai right in front of Sherry. The monster's claws nearly reached the woman, but she managed to escape, leaving the girl from the underworld to be brutally attacked. Re-entering the water, Sherry began thinking she needed to escape immediately, genuinely believing she might die there, and started swimming rapidly. More claws appeared and began screaming at her, trying to grab her underwater. They screamed that they didn't want to die, shouted that they had been used as sacrifices, and gradually began to overpower her until she finally found the knot in the protagonist's heart. Concentrating, she said she'd have to handle things her own way and began the dream-weaving process. Back in reality, the MC was still watching Sherry sleeping on the couch. He found her very strange, and now even more so as she appeared to be dying. If something happened to her, would the special department have a way to treat her? Suddenly, Shinji felt something causing him to fall to his knees, gasping for breath. That woman had done something to him. The scene changed. A coffee table appeared, covered with comic magazines, figurines, and a bag. Shinji was asleep at a computer, and someone shouted that they'd known he would be sleeping there. Still groggy, Shinji complained about the noise, but when he looked behind, he saw his two friends smiling at him. He couldn't believe they were alive, and Lee Zongxing asked why he was still sleeping. They were so excited they couldn't even sleep. Looking at the cell phone screen his friend showed him, there were messages from the game stating, "Now it's your turn." This startled the protagonist, who immediately demanded they delete that group. Zongxing became alarmed, but Shinji quickly reassured them. His abilities had now evolved, and Xiaowai was also much stronger. He wouldn't need to enter the game. Shinji begins a monstrous transformation. He manages to capture the game and disable its ability. In exchange, Shinji increasingly resembles a monster. A red aura takes over his body, sharpening his teeth and creating demonic armor. The system notifies him that he successfully saved his friends from death. The two boys start screaming and hugging him, begging him to wake up. The boy is confused. They scream that they don't want him to turn into a monster just to save their lives. The boys were crying, afraid that this might happen. Lai Zongxing says they know they're already dead, and Seta Binbin says he's happy that Shinji came there to see them. He couldn't let himself be overtaken by that monstrosity. They were waiting for him so they could burn the last magazines together. The boys start strangling him, saying they're proud to see how powerful he's become. Shabinbin says he could now avenge them by teaching those monsters a lesson, but he needed to take care of himself. Both of them start to fade away. Shinji realizes it's good that he's gotten so strong, and the boys complain he's always causing trouble for others, but they know what he really wants. What he truly desired was to destroy those monsters and lead humanity toward survival. The clock strikes 7 and Shinji starts waking up again. He seems to have traveled back in time and is again in that morning when he first met Sherry. He calls King Ji and asks if he can ask her a question. Agreeing with his request, she tells him to go ahead, and he asks if she is responsible for the community in the area where he lives. His doubt was about what would happen to those people who live there. Where would they go after the cleanup? Aokiji asks if that really matters. He says yes, since she fired them. Why wouldn't they receive any kind of compensation? Weren't they supposed to align with the interests of humans? It was their fault for not managing to save the residents of his building. The ones who remained alive weren't being properly relocated. Their lives would become even more difficult. What kind of protection was that? Aokiji stays silent for a moment. She then says she understands his concern. The special department had received his opinions and considered them valuable. However, that kind of specific action required approval from superiors. Shinji hangs up the phone. Looking behind him, he asks if she's satisfied. It was Sherry standing there, and she says this wasn't her desire. It was merely a projection of his inner self. Shinji remarks that she truly was a very capable psychiatrist, and she thanks him for the compliment. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he thanks her for the treatment and asks if they could finally leave there. She confirms that they can. But first, she says they still need to do another test and asks him to follow her so they can finally exit that dream. Opening his eyes for the 18th time, I'm feeling like I'm in the movie Inception. Shinji finally returns to actual reality. He is greeted by Sherry, smiling and holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. She says she took the liberty of using his kitchen to make tea, and he begins drinking it without saying a word. Putting the cup on the table, Shinji asks if they could start immediately so her mission would be finished, but she says that's not necessary. She would be staying there for a long while. She had something else to say about what happened. The families of his neighbors would receive a huge compensation for everything. Taking the crystal again and placing it into his hands, she says inspectors' opinions are always reported to the special department for improvements. This time, the crystal shines in a more inviting color, and Sherry says she is happy that his crisis is finally over. He then asks what would happen if the heart crystal remained black. Sherry replies that he already knows. In the long term, if he's killed in battle against a monster, there's a chance that he might become one himself. For Shinji, she was partially correct. In his dream, he deliberately took the initiative to become a monster himself. He had spent 100 million points to transform his physical body into that of a monster. Loss of consciousness, control, and sanity. He seems capable of seeing what he had done, but he doesn't know exactly what he did. All that remained in the end was the urge to kill. Shinji thinks it's probably best not to tell her that he did it intentionally within his dream. He then says she didn't need to worry, as he would work hard to never become a monster. The doorbell at his house rings again. Sherry promptly goes to answer it, and when she opens the door, Yubei is standing there, apologizing for coming unannounced because she was worried about his disappearance. Yubei had her eyes closed, so she didn't see that it was another woman who had answered the door. She says she hopes he isn't too sad and assures him she hadn't used the coin to discover any of his secrets. When Yubei opens her eyes to look at the president, all she sees is a pair of huge balloons, which surprises her. Embarrassed, she asks who she is and even wonders aloud as she knocked on the wrong door. Sherry simply says she's the new neighbor, while Shinji approaches the door, asking what Yubei was doing there. He tells her to come in. The 2 women sit on the sofa. Yubei finds her very attractive and kind and wonders if she really is just his neighbor, as Shinji doesn't seem hospitable at all. He turns on the TV and the news is on. A man shouts that his daughter has been kidnapped and questions if they'll ever catch the criminals who did this. The anchor says there have been numerous kidnappings recently, which has authorities concerned. Both women are watching the news, but Sherry observes Yubei with some caution. Noticing this, Shinji explains to her that Yubei is his subordinate and knows about the monsters, so she can speak freely. Yubei then begins discussing the kidnappings. The criminals are so cunning that the Public Security Department has considered asking for help from the Special Department, and they might need to assist. He asks if it's really that serious, but something catches his attention. Looking toward the corner of the house, he notices a presence, which turns out to be Xiaoai, who looks furious at seeing so many women in his home. Shinji stands up from the sofa and tells the women they can keep talking while he steps away for a moment. Entering his room and closing the door, he opens his notebook and notices something. Xiaoai's work has been affected by these kidnappings. The growth of the victim's suppages has significantly decreased. He had spent 900,000 points to strengthen her and deal with the neighbor, which earned him 500,000 legend points and 100,000 points each for good and evil. In a way, he had already recovered the points used to strengthen her, but after that, she couldn't achieve anything else and was frustrated by the kidnappers. He says that one shouldn't expect good things to happen naturally, but if what goes around comes around, why not add fuel to the fire? Xiaoai is behaving like a little child, and Shinji tells her he's had an idea. She's confused, but he asks if she'd like a new friend to keep her and Little Eye's company, already pulling out his notebook to create a new legend. After the 2 girls leave his house, he begins typing. Shinji remembers that his old roommate was obsessed with a movie called Phantom Caller, where the caller sends a message to the victim and kills them within 3 days. He starts looking for references to create a new urban legend, already anticipating the absurd cost it would take. He finds an interesting video. It's a song with a cheerful melody, but an extremely sad context. It's called A New Beginning. It was the last song composed by a genius songwriter, and she had become extremely popular because of this particular song. Unfortunately, that same night she had attracted demons to her doorstep, was kidnapped, and when the ransom demand was made, they didn't want police involvement. Initially, her parents didn't report it to the authorities and paid the demanded ransom. A reporter tried to exploit the incident by spreading news of the kidnapping, prompting the security department to send a rescue team, but it was too late. After the arrests, the police found evidence that she hadn't been abused during captivity and had even been given tools to continue composing music. For this reason, the song contained the bright dreams of a child's future. News about her reached its peak on the day of her death, after which she was quickly forgotten. Thinking about this, Shinji believes he could merge this story with the plot from his roommate's movie and begins creating his new urban legend. The Phantom Caller's targets would be kidnappers who would hear their own death screams over the phone, while their bodies play this song until the moment of their death. Someone answers a phone call, and when saying hello, hears someone screaming that the police were there. The man begins laughing and tries grabbing the girl while she cries and struggles to escape. But before he can harm her, a beep begins sounding near him. It was his phone. Answering the call, he hears a deafening scream. Suddenly, the song, A New Beginning, starts playing through the phone. The police officers shout, asking what's going on and questioning Lin Jong about what kind of trick he's pulling. However, he was already terrified. The musical notes from that song began invading his body, causing him intense pain. His body begins contorting until his head turns completely backward, and he is no longer there. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. That was the time between the suspect picking up the phone and being erased from existence. The strangest thing was that the phone rang at exactly 6 o'clock on the recording, yet the phone itself showed otherwise. Looking closely, the girl sees the figure of a smiling young woman, and then the scene changes again. Several police cars are parked in front of a building amid heavy rain. A woman points something out to Captain, but he ignores her, simply observing the video. In the footage, a man inside a police car with 2 officers begs forgiveness for what he did to his sister and says he doesn't want to go to jail. Their investigations indicated these kidnappings were collaborative crimes. When answering the call, he hears someone screaming for help. Suddenly, the little girl's song begins playing throughout the car. The officers shout, asking Lin Jong what's happening and what kind of trick this is. Lin Jong was already terrified. In exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds, he was erased from existence after answering the call. The strangest thing was that the call had been received exactly at 6 o'clock in the footage, yet the phone showed differently. This makes Captain thoughtful. He instructs the woman to leave first, as he still has some reports to deliver to his superiors. The notebook registers 1,245,516 legend points for the MC. Shinji now had evolved abilities, and Shoei was also much stronger, meaning he wouldn't have to enter the game himself. Immediately afterward, his spiritual power exceeds 200 points and qualifies him for rank 4. The system asks if he wishes to proceed, even though there is a chance of failure. Shinji had no idea there was a rank above 3 in this world, but we now return to 2 hours after the incident with the investigations. His superiors ask if he would still like to participate in the investigation, even if it's under the command of the special department, and he says yes. Aokiji was there explaining that this case didn't involve any resentful spirit that he knew of, but rather a monster, which was even more complicated to handle. Captain Bai, alarmed, asks what kind of monster it was, and she explains that they're manifestations of rules created specifically to kill humans. Until those rules are discovered, human deaths would be inevitable, which deeply frightens the captain. Bai remains silent for a moment. King Ji tells him that he could leave the investigation now, and they had already sent people to interrogate those who had been kidnapped. They confirmed that both suspects were erased from existence in exactly the same way. The specific manifestation is that when someone answers a call, they'll hear a scream foretelling their own death, which will occur exactly 3 minutes and 35 seconds later. According to statistics, 328 people between the ages of 12 and 80 have died, and the song, A New Beginning, changed its tone and became impossible to delete from the internet. The special department named this particular case Phantom Caller. Captain Bai apologizes to Aokiji, saying he was receiving a call from his mother and needed to answer it. The person on the other end tells him to come home immediately because something had happened to his wife's family. He needed to leave quickly. At the captain's home, the two arrive to find his wife crying over the death of both her parents. This makes him decide to continue participating in the investigation because he wanted to avenge his in-laws. Aokiji says she won't stop him now that he's made his decision, and then hands him an envelope asking his wife to leave because they needed to discuss something confidential. The woman protests, but he reassures her it's fine because from now on, she would move to his parents' house. She starts to leave, crying, as the captain displays a frustrated expression. Aokiji assures him the department would look after his family, but now he had a mission. It was time for him to pick up the phone of the deceased and use it to call himself. They would try to uncover the monster's rules through trial and error. He agrees and then begins to wonder if he would really die just by answering a phone call, even as he performs the act. Captain Bai answers his own call, but all that happens is that his voice comes out from the other phone without any issues. Aokiji says this was enough. 8 hours after the incident, a stack of documents is placed on a desk with all the deaths that had occurred in the last 2 hours. Bai asks how many people have died so far, and Aokiji's assistant replies more than 1,300, then asks if he has any leads, but he denies. She takes a small package from her bag, saying it was sent by his wife through the special department. It was a diary that belonged to his in-laws, hidden within a wall. She hadn't had the courage to read it herself, but ultimately decided to give it to the department. The assistant says that after he finished analyzing it, the department would take the diary to see if it could aid in the investigation. However, when he opens it and reads the content, Captain Bai's face changes to one of sheer terror. It was a confession detailing the murder of a child. In the diary, his father-in-law confessed that one day their daughter had come home bloody and injured, having been assaulted by a classmate. The boy's family had no intention of apologizing. Instead, they threw money in his face and beat him up because he was an outsider. So he went to his hometown and asked someone to kidnap the child, and the man agreed because he owed his father-in-law a debt. The plan was simple and went perfectly. He had an alibi, and nobody suspected him. He would not allow a mere child to ruin his family, so he buried the boy alive. To his surprise, his wife discovered everything but said nothing, silently helping him bury the child. They promised each other that once their daughter had a stable life, they would turn themselves in to the police. The diary was merely a record of their destined fate. Shinji was impressed by this story, seeing it as using evil against evil, and considers adding a new rule since all his points had already been recovered. The new rule stated that no matter how long ago the crime was committed, the criminals would still be targeted by the Phantom Caller. The points he gained from this new legend far surpassed the previous two, and he never imagined he would reach rank 4 so easily. His abilities had now evolved, and Shoei had also grown much stronger. He wouldn't need to enter the game. Shinji begins a monstrous transformation. He manages to capture the game and disable its ability. A pigeon lands on top of the girl's head, startling her. It had emo bangs and a small paper rolled up on its leg. The boy calls the pigeon onto his arm and says to Yubei that he needs a favor as he sends the pigeon back. Sending the pigeon back, the MC writes that it wasn't for free in his reply. Shinji then decides to follow her to see what's going on. He wasn't even worried about being noticed, considering they lived in the same direction. The MC follows the girl through various places until finally reaching a building. Shinji then uses his powers to scan the entire building. He reaches the apartment door, and when it's opened, a woman answers. Smiling, he calls her auntie and says he's looking for Xiaobai. Calling her that makes her mother wonder if they are very close, prompting her to ask about their relationship. With great audacity, Shinji introduces himself as her boyfriend. Shinji boldly introduces himself as her boyfriend. With tremendous audacity, Shinji introduces himself as her boyfriend, leaving the woman surprised. Her mother immediately wonders if they're that close and asks directly about their relationship. Shinji replies instantly, calling her auntie and saying he's looking for Xiaobai. Her mother invites him to stay for dinner and to introduce his parents to them. But just as quickly as she looked surprised, she started acting normally again and calling him Shinji, invited him in. Yubei came closer and grabbed his arm. That confirmed to the protagonist that something was off about her. Her mother began to say that unfortunately, she hadn't been able to make friends before due to her shy nature, and she didn't expect her to find a boyfriend right after transferring. That made her mother very happy and already imagining their wedding. The woman then invited him to stay for dinner and bring his parents to meet them sometime. The boy immediately said it wasn't necessary, his parents were dead. She apologized and said she didn't know. But Shinji took Yubei's hand and said it was fine. Now he had her to comfort him. I know exactly what kind of comfort he means. The boy went on saying he was an introvert who had no friends until she transferred and changed him too, which made the girl blush. The mother then decides to leave the two alone and says she'll go prepare dinner, as her husband would be arriving soon. Fine Yubei takes off her glasses and, looking provocatively at the protagonist, asks if he'd like to go to her room, and he confirms that he would. Leading him by the hand, Shinji starts to think that the moment he said they were a couple, she changed her behavior to that of a girlfriend. Everything about her felt real. Her expressions, tone of voice, emotions, and eyes were just like those of real people, but that only proved that the Kingan Yubei in front of him was a monster. As the door closes, we see that her face had been replaced with that of a doll. Judging by her mother's behavior, Yubei was the only one infected by the monster, so her parents were safe, for now. These monsters don't think emotionally. The reason they act this way is purely out of imitation. Shinji wonders if she's already dead, if the monster took her body after killing her, with the goal of killing the rest of the family as well. If that really is the case, he needed to get the coin for himself. Shinji takes the coin in his hand and asks her to tell him what place is in danger. The monster then says she forgot the coin at the club and apologizes, but says she'll make it up to him tonight. The girl was already taking off her clothes, and I'm wondering if there's something wrong with Shinji because he just walks past her without caring and says it's fine. Looking to the side, he stares at the doll and asks what it is. Yubei explains that it was a gift from her neighbor, and he asks if he can have it. She confirms yes, and that leaves Shinji completely confused. As the murder rule wasn't activated, could it just be a regular doll? Looking more carefully, he can sense a bit of spiritual power in that object. Could it be that the doll was alive? Was he sensing that because he had reached level 4? It was like this kind of power, imperceptible to most people, wasn't easy to ignore. Yubei's father arrives and asks who that was, looking at Shinji, and Yubei introduces him as her boyfriend. Confused, the man asks again, and Shinji notices that his behavior was also normal. He greets him, calling him uncle, and immediately after, asks her to go to her room as he has something to discuss with her parents. She agrees and leaves the room. The man adjusts his glasses, apparently ready to give the boy a lecture. But the moment she enters her room, he grabs both of them by the arms and leads them to a safer place. In a more private room, he begins to explain that the Qian Yubei living with them was not their daughter. That thing wasn't even a human being. The man is in shock and asks him to explain. The boy says she told him her parents knew about her powers, which meant they were aware of the existence of monsters in this world. What's inside their daughter is actually a monster that doesn't have the ability to use the fate coin, and if they didn't believe him, they could run a test on her. However, the best option was for the two of them to stay far away from that apartment. He hands them a phone and tells them to call him if there's any trouble. Yubei's father asks about his daughter, but he tells them to stay there as he'll call her, but they need to stay calm to avoid alerting the monster. Yubei goes to the living room and asks if everything is okay, while her parents introduce themselves as her aunt and uncle and ask about her real parents. Immediately, the girl assumes the identity of a niece and explains to the two that her parents weren't home and asks if they want to wait there. The two are completely shocked by this, but Shinji steps between the three of them and says they'll have to leave now as they're busy. Letting them know they can go, the two head into a bedroom, and Yubei's mother starts to cry, asking if their daughter was dead. I hope not, and that they managed to save her. Entering her room, he finds the girl almost undressed, asking why he was back so soon. Activating his powers, he says it was time to start trial and error, since she wanted so badly to be human. With a punch that breaks the wall behind her, Shinji says he's going to show her how humans die. With a strong twist, Shinji breaks the monster's neck, and at that moment I'm already crying. She collapses limply to the ground. Quickly, the thing recovers, saying it had apparently been exposed, and its head spun in a way no living persons ever would. The blow Shinji had delivered seemed strong enough to defeat her, because it looked like she was drowning. Suddenly, a small puppet falls to the ground and another puppet on her chest explodes. Yubei appears completely naked, screaming and crying. She says she thought she'd never see him again, and then hugs him, leaving the boy totally speechless. I know exactly where he had reactions. Even though he was shocked to see that Yubei wasn't dead, he notices the puppet beginning to open the door and escape. He yells at the girl to get dressed quickly, because they needed to chase that thing. He couldn't believe there was a thinking monster involved. Outside the building, Shinji had activated his scanning powers, but couldn't find a single trace indicating where it had fled. Apparently, the puppet had managed to hide its aura inside the building, so he called the special department for support. The monster in question didn't seem very strong and was ranked under misfortune, but it had the power to control and influence others. He receives a response that they would install cameras in the area for investigation, and he asks them to notify the police to destroy any puppets they find. The operator complies with his order, and Shinji thinks about the rules of monsters. They needed to move somehow and leave traces. Xiao Song would go to her victims, while Xiao Ai would pull hers into her domain. Xiao Yan just waited for people to look into her eyes to attack. The puppet's case seemed very similar to Xiao Song's, but if she could teleport after being caught, why bother running? Yubei's parents try to speak with the boy, but he tells them to follow him to their house, as it would be safer there at the moment. He had the coin of fate in his pocket and felt that it seemed normal again. That meant Qian Yubei had returned to normal. Good thing too. I was starting to think the protagonist's future wife wouldn't survive. The girl's parents followed him around the building while another person was leaving and saying goodbye to their parents. Inside their backpack was, in fact, the evil puppet. Looks like it managed to escape. In Yubei's living room, they were still uneasy about her presence, so he shows them a way to prove she was their real daughter. He places the coin in her hand, telling her to ask a random question. Activating the coin's power, it falls onto the coffee table, and Yubei herself realizes she really was herself. Stammering and starting to cry, she rushes toward her parents to hug them, saying she thought she'd never see them again, and they were overjoyed to have their daughter back. He sees there was nothing wrong with her, since her memory returned the moment she failed to ask the coin a question. Seeing the orb exposed in a toy, he asks if she regrets not training her abilities and using the orb to grow stronger. She cries with regret. The news on TV begins reporting on the Phantom Collar legend, and the media manipulation begins to prevent people from using their cell phones. Shinji knows this was the work of the special department and wonders what kind of item they plan to use now against the new urban legend gain traction. As Shinji leaves Yubei's house, a meeting is taking place at the special department building between King Ji and Kang Ping. There was heavy pressure on him to use the invisible scissors due to the accidents involving multiple investigators and intellectuals. He agrees. When she says she'll contact the item holders, Kang Ping interrupts, saying *T* would be the one to use the item this time. Aokiji is shocked by this. They still needed him too much for him to be risking himself like that. She could still use several people with terminal illnesses who were willing to risk their lives, and she herself could even take his place. But he already seemed to have made his decision and says that the young people had a lot in common and she couldn't deny that. She asks if he was sure. He replies that she should prepare herself because they would meet in the basement. His spiritual power was much higher than everyone else's there. If they could deal with the Phantom Collar without any casualties, it would be best for everyone. Currently, they were low on funds. It would be better not to have to pay so many people. Using artificial eyes would be cheaper. In truth, Kang Ping was excited to do this, and he felt like it was his first day at the special department all over again. In a prison, the three from the department are there. Kang Ping holds a glowing pair of scissors in his hands, and the gagged prisoner begins to tremble and cry. A phone starts playing the cursed song. The scissors begin to emit a blue energy. Kang Ping uses the power of the scissors at that very moment, cutting the music in half. Aokiji and the blonde assistant just watch. Don't blame me for not remembering her name. She's very random in the story and barely shows up. At that moment, Kang's body starts to act strangely, and he begins to scream loudly, holding his own neck. The others present look on in fear as the special department chief's body explodes in front of them. We return to the MC's house, and Shinji is standing at the door watching Little Eyes and Xiaoai, who are next to Xiaoxun, completely cut into pieces. Xiaoai asks if he felt it too. Shinji says she wasn't dead, just restrained. I feel sorry for the demonic little girl. What madness. The protagonist sighs and begins to use his powers, saying this would only take a minute. He would just use the legend points he had earned from her. After consuming 30,000 points, she can now resume completing the deaths that were interrupted by the scissors, and the interruption of the music will no longer prevent death. Now she was returning stronger and had an operational range across the entire country. Smiling, the evil little girl thanks him and gives him a smile. In the next moment, she jumps on him, hugging him and crying because she was afraid she would die that time. Little Eyes gets jealous. Unfortunately, not everything is perfect, and suddenly the girl completely loses her voice. Shinji asks what happened. The system informs that after using the invisible scissors, the special department decided to use the silent horn together with it. But Shinji doesn't know what that item is. The notebook explains that it's an item that removes all sound from an area, and the department used it in slum areas where the risk factor was higher. The cost of this was silencing over 10,000 people in the area and leaving them unable to make any sound for the rest of their lives. Xiao Yan was crying, but the boy comforts her with a pat on the head and comments that this was truly expensive. He didn't have enough legend points. We shift scenes to the special department hospital. In the intensive care unit, Aokiji is beside a bed with Kang Ping. He had been severely injured after using the invisible scissors, but asks if the horn had been activated. King Ji confirms that it had, and now the Phantom Collar could no longer commit crimes, so it was safe to say he was restrained. Tomorrow, the Public Security Department would hold a press conference and explain that the cause of people's vocal paralysis was a terrorist attack. Compensation for these people had already been prepared, along with a confidentiality agreement for them to sign. Either way, that didn't matter much, because that massive compensation was paid by the old folks in the intellectual circle. Kang Ping changes the subject and asks how things were going with Hongyan, and she explains. He's been missing lately because he's preparing to face the Yomi girl once again, and Kang asks if they're not planning a farewell party for him. Returning to the matter that really mattered, he asks her to call Ghost and distract him in case he objects. King Ji asks if that's appropriate, but he says it doesn't matter. With his abilities, the monsters they fear might be nothing more than pebbles to step on. Whether she trusted him or not, it was interesting that they might be able to get some help from him. A plate of food is in front of us, and I haven't had dinner yet, so just that image made me hungry. But the one sitting at the table is Shinji, asking if he'd been invited to dinner at a cafe. With him are Hongyin and Aokiji. The redhead protests, asking what the problem with that is. They could eat whatever they wanted there. Hongyin starts crying and being dramatic, saying he's about to face the Yomi girl again, so Shinji should be nicer to him. The boy simply says he wishes him success, but that doesn't seem to satisfy the redhead. He keeps crying, and Shinji asks what Aokiji wanted. She shows him a card, saying it was a membership card for a site run by the country's top plutocrats, and its purpose was to serve as a channel for the top monster investigators. Use those contacts. Shinji quickly takes the card from her hand and asks why she gave it to him. She explains that even the wealthy can end up dying if they encounter monsters out there, but those who have good connections in the special department can find help. These connections help them buy items that assist in dealing with such problems, or even call an inspector directly. Another girl explains that they're only doing this due to a lack of money, but Shinji still didn't understand why he was given this card. The girl then asks if he doesn't know. After he suppressed the evil neighbor, he became famous among the higher-ups, so he might have excellent connections now. Some strange things have been happening, and Shinji wasn't an ordinary inspector. That card was proof that he stood out from the rest, and he would become the pillar of the inspectors, because everyone there needed his help to defeat these monsters. His obsession with monsters came from the friends he lost to the game. That makes her ask him if he had anything to do with the sudden disappearance of this particular monster. Shinji stays silent for a moment, and the brunette girl gets excited, thinking she's about to hear some juicy gossip from him. But Shinji is thinking about Aokiji's motivations behind these actions. They were on high alert with him because of his aggressive stance on monsters, and they might start suspecting his intentions. Shinji says he's been thinking about the disappearance of that monster too. Maybe it got scared of him, but she was overestimating him. It wasn't like he had the power to kill monsters. He says that, but remembers that the monster from the game is inside Little Eye's stomach now and has become a part of him. Standing up, Shinji says he'd like to emphasize that he passed all the special department's tests, but in any case, he would gladly accept her kindness. The MC's thoughts were focused on taking missions and recovering his legend points, and he mentally thanks her for now knowing how to free Xiao Xun. Aokiji also stands up from the table and says this is just a misunderstanding. She didn't mean to offend him, only to clarify things. Saying goodbye to everyone, Shinji walks in the opposite direction from the group of investigators. But before they part ways, Aokiji says the person he needs to look for is named Mr. Xiang, and he's offering a good reward to whoever finds his missing grandson. The situation was as if the boy had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace, and the inspector investigating the case also disappeared the same way. The clock in Shinji's house showed 11:30, and he says that Hongyin would arrive at midnight. He asks Xiao Ai if she would be alright, and the girl, dressed like a graduate, asks him to trust her, but if he wants, he could test her. He says it's not necessary. She could use those two annoying guys over there to test herself, though they didn't seem too interested in testing Xiao Ai. Shinji says he still needed to investigate something, and it probably had to do with the special department. If it was a monster, it could be really exhausting. But suddenly, before he can finish speaking, his vision starts to blur. The three notice it and try to talk to him, but the boy collapses on the ground, unconscious. Everything around him seemed to be melting, and Shinji wonders what kind of place that was. He felt like his spirit was separated from his body and trapped there. Opening his eyes, the protagonist sees himself in a place full of mirrors, with several people inside them screaming and begging to get out, calling someone named Hichan. Shinji seemed to be one of the people trapped inside those mirrors, or were they portraits? It looked like an artist's room. That place was too noisy. The MC first decides to investigate who this person was that everyone was calling and cursing. He didn't seem like a monster. He just seemed like someone who had used an item to do all that. The man says Shinji was the calmest spirit he had ever seen and asks why he isn't afraid. Shinji doesn't answer his question, which seems to irritate the man, who takes the paper with him and says he doesn't like his face. The boy notices the man had the smile of someone who believed himself all-powerful, and then he begins tearing the paper where Shinji was. It was some kind of punishment, and the man demands that he say why he wasn't afraid like the others, or was he just pretending? Shinji asks if he is Hichan, and says it's not too late to regret his actions, but the man doesn't seem to care much. But he says that someone named Tian had paid him to assassinate the MC. He says that soon the boy would be begging for his life, as he was just a mere spirit in his hand. He decides to give this Tian a 30% discount for the protagonist's death and starts laughing maniacally. Shinji begins to wonder if he knows anyone by that name. In the end, he decides it doesn't matter.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.